Tonight, we descend into one of the most unforgettable prison stories ever told in gaming. This is the complete tale of Gothic, the groundbreaking 2001 action RPG from Piranha Bytes that would forever change how we think about open-world fantasy games. What begins as a simple story of survival in a magical prison colony transforms into something far more sinister. An ancient evil stirs beneath the earth. 3 factions vie for power while prisoners struggle just to see another day, and one nameless convict will become the only thing standing between the world and an apocalyptic demon that has waited centuries for freedom. This is the complete story of Gothic, the Kingdom in Flames. Our story begins not in a prison, but on a battlefield. The Kingdom of Mertana, once a symbol of human prosperity and strength, now finds itself locked in a brutal, seemingly endless war against an implacable enemy, the Orcs. These weren't the mindless brutes of other fantasy tales. The Orcs of Mertana were an ancient race with their own culture, their own gods, and an unshakable determination to crush humanity beneath their advance. King Robar II, ruler of Mertana, had built his legacy through conquest and unification. The young king, who inherited the crown from his father, had proven himself a capable military leader. He'd united the fractured territories of his kingdom, recovered the legendary scepter of Varon that became his symbol of divine authority, and surrounded himself with capable advisors and generals. His inner circle included Lord Hagen, commander of the royal forces, and most notably, a brilliant military mind named Lee, who served as Lord Commander of the armies. For years, the war seemed manageable. King Robar's forces held their ground. They pushed back against Orcish incursions. They protected their borders and kept the enemy at bay. But wars, especially long wars, demand resources. They demand sacrifices. And above all, they demand weapons. This is where magical ore enters our story. In the world of Mertana, certain minerals possessed inherent magical properties. When forged into weapons and armor, this ore created equipment far superior to conventional steel. A sword infused with magical ore could cleave through enemy ranks like parchment. Armor reinforced with it could turn aside blows that would shatter normal plate. For a kingdom at war, magical ore wasn't just valuable, it was essential for survival. The problem was simple. Magical ore was rare. Deposits existed in only a few locations throughout the known world, and many of those were already lost to Orcish conquest. When the Orcs invaded Nordmar, they seized control of some of the richest ore mines on the continent. King Robar watched helplessly as one of his primary sources of magical ore fell into enemy hands. Without those weapons, without that supernatural edge, his armies began to lose ground. The Orcs, despite their lack of what humans would call cunning or tactical genius, possessed overwhelming advantages. They were larger, stronger, and seemingly tireless in battle. Where a human soldier might fall after sustaining wounds that would be survivable with rest and treatment, an Orc would fight on through injuries that should have been fatal. Their sheer physical might meant that in close quarters combat, a single Orc warrior could match 2 or 3 human soldiers. And now, with humanity's supply of magical ore severely limited, that advantage grew even more pronounced. King Robar's armies continued to lose ground. Month by month, year by year, the Orcish hordes pushed deeper into Murtanan territory. The western regions fell, then Varant, then the Midlands. Each loss meant fewer resources, fewer soldiers, fewer places to retreat. The king's advisors brought him increasingly dire reports. Without a dramatic change, without some way to dramatically increase their supply of magical ore, the war was lost. Murtana would fall. Everything King Robar II had built would crumble to dust. But there was one remaining source of magical ore, one place where the veins of enchanted mineral still ran rich and deep. On the Isle of Khorinis, nestled in a remote mountain valley, lay the last great ore deposits, still under Murtanan control. The Valley of Mines had been worked for generations, but never with the intensity the desperate times now demanded. King Robar needed every ounce of ore that valley could produce. He needed it extracted, refined, and forged into weapons as quickly as possible. He needed a workforce that would mine day and night without rest, without complaint, without the luxury of fair wages or reasonable conditions. He needed prisoners. The king's decree was absolute and merciless. Every criminal convicted of any crime, regardless of how minor the offense, would be sentenced to the mining colony in the Valley of Mines. Thieves, murderers, and political dissidents alike would find themselves thrown into the valley to work the mines until their bodies gave out. In a single stroke, King Robar transformed his prison system into a forced labor operation on a scale never before seen in Murtana. But there was an obvious problem. If you gathered together hundreds, perhaps thousands of desperate criminals in one location and forced them to work under brutal conditions, they'll eventually rebel. They'll kill their guards, seize weapons, and escape back into the countryside. So King Robar needed something more than walls and guards to keep his prisoners contained. He needed something that made escape absolutely impossible. He needed magic. The barrier. The king summoned his most powerful mages. 12 of the greatest spellcasters in the kingdom received the royal command. They were to travel to Khorinis, to the Valley of Mines, and there they would perform a ritual of unprecedented scale and complexity. They would create a magical barrier, an invisible dome of pure arcane energy that would seal the valley completely. Nothing living could pass through it from the inside. Objects could be thrown through, resources could be extracted, but any living creature that touched the barrier from within would be destroyed instantly. The mages who received this assignment included some of the most respected names in Murtanan magical academia. Callisto, a master of fire magic who had served the crown for decades. Xardas, leader of the water mages, known for his analytical mind and careful approach to spellcraft. Raordian, Mixia, Nefarius, Murdarian, Torres, and Drago, each an accomplished magician in their own right. And then there was Xardas. Xardas held the position of High Magician of the Circle of Fire. He was, by all accounts, the most powerful mage in the entire group. His knowledge of arcane theory exceeded even the most learned scholars. His ability to channel magical energy surpassed his peers. When the king commanded that the barrier be created, it was Xardas who supervised the entire operation. It was Xardas who designed the ritual. It was Xardas who would ensure everything went according to plan. The mages arrived in the Valley of Mines and began their preparations. The valley itself was already a functioning operation. Guards oversaw prisoners who worked the old mine, extracting ore under brutal conditions. The castle that served as the operation's headquarters sat at the valley's center, its ancient stone walls a reminder of earlier times when this place served a different purpose. Royal guards patrolled the perimeter. Convicts labored in the depths. Everything functioned with the grim efficiency of a military operation. The mages established themselves in the castle, setting up their ritual space and gathering the necessary components for the barrier spell. This wasn't simple magic. This wasn't a spell that one mage could cast alone. It required all 12 working in perfect synchronization, channeling their combined power into a single unified enchantment. The focus stones, ancient magical artifacts that could store and direct massive amounts of arcane energy, were positioned at 5 specific points around the valley according to precise geometric calculations. These stones would serve as anchoring points for the barrier, maintaining its structure and ensuring its stability. The day of the ritual arrived. Convicts continued their work in the mines, unaware of what was about to happen. Guards maintained their posts. The mages assembled in their ritual chamber and began the casting. Xardas led the incantation, his voice steady and confident as he guided his fellow spellcasters through the complex sequence of magical formulae. The spell began to take shape. Invisible at first, the barrier started to form as a dome over the valley. Energy crackled through the air. The focus stones glowed with accumulated power. Everything proceeded exactly as planned. The barrier grew, expanding upward and outward, creating an impenetrable shell that would trap every living thing inside. And then something went wrong. A disturbance in the magical currents, a fluctuation in the flow of energy. Perhaps one of the mages made an error. Perhaps the ritual itself contained a flaw that none had anticipated. Perhaps, as some would later suggest, someone intentionally sabotaged the casting. Whatever the cause, the barrier didn't stop where it was supposed to stop. The spell spun out of control. The dome expanded far beyond its intended boundaries, growing larger and larger until it encompassed not just the mining operation, but the entire valley. The mages themselves, who had expected to remain outside the barrier, found themselves trapped within their own creation. Guards, castle staff, everyone in the valley was suddenly sealed inside an invisible prison with no way out. 1 second of negligence, 1 moment of lost concentration or intentional manipulation. That's all it took for the entire plan to collapse into catastrophe. The prisoners realized what had happened almost immediately. The guards, disoriented by the magical backlash, lost control of the situation. Convicts who had nothing to lose saw an opportunity and seized it with desperate violence. They killed the guards. They took their weapons and armor. They stormed the castle and overthrew the royals who had been overseeing the operation. When the dust settled and bodies cooled, the prisoners controlled everything. King Robar II, safe in his capital far from the valley, received reports of the disaster with growing horror. The barrier had worked, in a sense. It was stable. It was impenetrable. But now his most powerful mages were trapped inside with thousands of violent criminals. The ore supply he so desperately needed was now in the hands of prisoners who had every reason to hate him. The king faced an impossible choice. He could abandon the valley entirely, accepting the loss of both his mages and his ore supply. Or he could negotiate. He could treat these prisoners, these criminals and outcasts, as if they were a legitimate power and make a deal with them. He chose negotiation. The agreement reached was simple and terrible. The prisoners would continue mining ore. They would bring it to designated collection points at the barrier's edge. In exchange, King Robar would send supplies into the valley: food, tools, weapons, medicine, even women to keep the prisoners satisfied. The convoy system was established, with regular shipments passing through the barrier's one-way permeability. Resources went in, ore came out, and everyone pretended this was a workable, long-term solution. For 10 years, this arrangement held. 10 years of uneasy peace. 10 years of ore flowing out of the valley while supplies flowed in. 10 years of the prisoners building their own society within the magical prison, establishing hierarchies and territories and cultures that evolved in isolation from the outside world. And then a new prisoner arrived who would change everything. The 3 camps. The valley wasn't just a prison. Over those 10 years, it became something more complex. 3 distinct camps emerged, each with its own leadership, its own philosophy and its own vision for what life under the barrier should look like. Understanding these camps, their relationships and rivalries, is essential to understanding everything that followed. The old camp rose first, built around the castle that had once housed the royal operation. When the prisoners revolted and seized control, the men who led that rebellion became the valley's new rulers. They called themselves the Ore Barons, and their leader was a man named Gomez. Gomez was everything one might expect from a prison warlord. Ruthless, paranoid, obsessed with maintaining power, and absolutely willing to kill anyone who threatened his position. He sat on his throne in the castle, surrounded by his most trusted lieutenants, and ruled the old camp with an iron fist. The camp operated on a strict hierarchical system. At the bottom were the diggers, prisoners who worked the mines and received only the bare minimum needed for survival. Above them were the shadows, skilled workers and fighters who had proven their worth. Then came the guards, Gomez's personal enforcers who maintained order through violence and intimidation. And at the very top sat Gomez himself, along with his fellow Ore Barons and the fire mages who had been trapped in the valley during the barrier's creation. The fire mages occupied a strange position in the old camp's hierarchy. They weren't prisoners exactly. They had been royal servants before the catastrophe. But now, trapped in the valley with no way home, they found themselves dependent on Gomez's goodwill for survival. Caristo led the fire mages, maintaining what dignity he could while navigating the dangerous political waters of the camp. The mages continued their studies, communicated with the outside world through magical means when possible, and traded their services to the Ore Barons in exchange for protection and resources. The old camp was the richest of the three camps, and by far the most organized. They controlled the old mine, the largest and most productive ore source in the valley. They maintained exclusive trading rights with King Robar's forces outside the barrier. When convoys arrived from the outside world, they went to the old camp. When ore needed to be delivered to meet the king's demands, it came from the old camp's stockpiles. This gave Gomez tremendous leverage. He could offer newcomers a path to prosperity if they proved loyal. He could provide relative safety and comfort to those who submitted to his authority. But not everyone was willing to submit. The new camp formed when a group of prisoners, led by a man named Lee, decided they wanted no part of Gomez's tyranny. These weren't random malcontents or troublemakers. Many were former soldiers, mercenaries, and warriors who refused to bow to anyone. And Lee himself was no ordinary prisoner. Before his imprisonment, Lee had been Lord Commander of King Robar's armies. He was a brilliant military strategist, a respected leader, and arguably the most important person in the entire Myrtanan war effort. The nobles of the kingdom had feared Lee's influence with the king. They worried that an honest, principled military man might expose their corruption and threaten their power. So they framed him. The Queen's murder, a crime Lee would never commit, was pinned on him through a carefully orchestrated conspiracy. His years of loyal service saved him from execution, but King Robar had no choice but to sentence his most capable general to life imprisonment in the Valley of Mines. Lee arrived in the valley bitter, betrayed, and burning for revenge. He gathered like-minded prisoners who valued freedom over Gomez's security. They established the new camp in the northern part of the valley, built around a dam and agricultural area where they could grow their own food. The camp attracted rogues, hunters, and mercenaries who preferred the rough equality of Lee's leadership to the rigid hierarchy of the old camp. The new camp had its own mine, the Free Mine, which they operated independently of Gomez's control. But they faced a critical problem. Without trading rights with the outside world, they had no way to exchange their ore for supplies. Gomez controlled that relationship completely. So the new camp scrapers worked not for profit, but for a different goal entirely. The camp's leadership included not just Lee and his mercenaries, but also a group of mages called the Water Magicians. Like the fire mages in the old camp, these spellcasters had been trapped during the barrier's creation. But unlike Charisto and his colleagues, the water mages refused to accept their imprisonment. Led by a mage named Xardas, they devoted themselves to finding a way to destroy the barrier and escape the valley. Their plan was ambitious and dangerous. They would gather all the ore extracted from the Free Mine into a single massive pile. Then, using the same focus stones that had been used to create the barrier, they would perform a ritual that would cause all that accumulated magical energy to detonate in one catastrophic explosion. The blast, they theorized, would be powerful enough to shatter the barrier itself. Whether anyone would survive the explosion was a secondary concern. Freedom, at any cost, was the goal. While the old camp represented order through oppression and the new camp embodied the promise of liberation through desperate measures, a third power emerged from an entirely unexpected direction. Deep in the swamps at the eastern edge of the valley, a new kind of community took root. This wasn't built on hierarchy or military structure. It was built on faith. The Sect camp, also called the Swamp Camp or the Brotherhood of the Sleeper, formed around a man named Wyberian. Like every other prisoner in the valley, Wyberian arrived as a convict and initially settled in the old camp. But something happened to him there. He began experiencing visions, dreams that felt more real than waking life. In these visions, a voice spoke to him, a presence that identified itself as a god who had been forgotten by the world above. This entity promised Uberian and anyone who would follow him one thing that neither the old camp nor the new camp could offer: salvation. The voice called itself the Sleeper, and it claimed to be the only power capable of destroying the barrier and freeing the prisoners. It told Uberian where to build a temple. It led him to the swamps, to ancient ruins that had stood empty for centuries. It taught him and his followers a new form of magic, spells that could control minds and bend wills. And it showed them swampweed, a plant with powerful consciousness expanding properties that made it easier to enter meditative trances and commune with their god. Uberian and his followers left the old camp and established their community around the ancient swamp temple. The Brotherhood grew steadily, attracting prisoners who found hope in Uberian's message. The camp's structure was religious rather than political. At the top stood Uberian himself, the highest guru and spiritual leader. Below him served other gurus who had mastered the Brotherhood's mental magic. The Templars formed the Brotherhood's warrior class, powerful fighters who protected the camp and served as missionaries, traveling to the old mine to trade swampweed for minecrawler secretions needed for the Brotherhood's sacred potions. And at the bottom were the novices, new converts who worked the camp, gathered swampweed, and trained in the hopes of advancing to guru or Templar status. The Brotherhood was unique in another way. They had renounced the traditional gods of Mirtana: Innos, god of light and order; Beliar, god of death and chaos; Adanos, the neutral creator deity. The Brotherhood rejected all of them, declaring that the Sleeper was the only god worthy of worship. This divine being, they believed, would reward their faith with freedom. When the time came, when they had proven themselves worthy, the Sleeper would awaken and shatter the barrier, leading them all to salvation. The other camps viewed the Brotherhood with suspicion and mockery. To outsiders, they were crazy cultists, weed-smoking fanatics who had lost their minds in the swamps. Even their name became a joke. People called them the Swamp Loonies. But the Brotherhood continued growing, and their faith never wavered. They had something neither the old camp nor the new camp could offer: purpose that transcended mere survival or political power. These were the three camps of the Valley of Mines. The old camp, offering security and prosperity at the cost of freedom. The new camp, promising liberation through a massive gamble that might kill everyone in the valley. And the Sect camp, offering spiritual salvation through faith in a mysterious god that might not even exist. 3 different visions, 3 different futures, and all of them about to be tested by the arrival of one nameless prisoner who would force the valley to confront its darkest truths. The Nameless Hero arrives. Our protagonist's story begins, like so many others, with judgment. We never learn his name. We never discover what crime he committed to earn his sentence. The game itself deliberately keeps these details vague, allowing players to imagine their own backstory. What we know is this: a young man, healthy and capable despite his circumstances, was convicted of some offense serious enough to warrant imprisonment in the Valley of Mines. The execution of his sentence followed the same brutal process that countless others had experienced. Guards dragged him to a cliff overlooking the barrier. They prepared to throw him through the magical field, consigning him to a lifetime of imprisonment with no possibility of parole, no chance of appeal, no hope of ever seeing the outside world again. But just before they hurled him through, something unexpected happened. A fire mage stepped forward from the royal procession. This wasn't normal procedure. Mages didn't involve themselves in the mundane business of prisoner transport. But this one had a request. He offered the convict a deal. The mage explained that he needed someone to deliver a letter to the fire mages trapped inside the valley. The magicians of fire had lost contact with their trapped colleagues. They needed to know what was happening inside, needed to send instructions or warnings, or simply maintain some connection with their brothers who might never escape. The prisoner, the mage suggested, was going into the valley anyway. If he agreed to deliver this letter to the fire mages at the old camp, he could name his own reward. The mages would give him anything he asked for once the letter was delivered. The nameless prisoner considered this. He could refuse, certainly. He could tell the mage to keep his letter and his empty promises, or he could accept, recognizing that having powerful allies inside the prison, even mages who might not be able to help him escape, was better than entering the valley with nothing and no one. He agreed to the deal with one condition. The pompous magistrate reading his sentence needed to stop talking. The convict was done listening to speeches about justice and the king's mercy and whatever other nonsense these officials told themselves to justify throwing human beings into magical prisons. The mage agreed. The magistrate sputtered with outrage but fell silent. And then guards seized the prisoner by his arms and hurled him through the barrier. The sensation of passing through the magical field was described as intensely unpleasant, but not harmful, at least when traveling from outside to inside. The prisoner tumbled through the air, fell into the water of a small lake, and surfaced to find himself in the Valley of Mines. Behind him, the barrier shimmered invisibly. Above him, free people looked down from the cliff, and around him, the valley stretched out in all its brutal beauty. The first thing he encountered was violence. This should have been a warning of things to come. Before he could even get his bearings, a prisoner with a scarred face and hungry eyes approached him with clear ill intent. This wasn't about theft or territory. This was about establishing dominance, about showing this newcomer that he was weak and vulnerable and that the valley operated on rules very different from the outside world's laws. The scarred man, later revealed to be named Bullet, raised his fists and moved in for what he clearly expected to be an easy beating. But before he could land a blow, another prisoner intervened. This one was older, calm, dressed in leather armor that marked him as someone of importance. He told Bullet and his companions to back off. He told them to leave the newcomer alone. And when they protested, when Bullet started to argue, the newcomer's savior made it clear through tone and reputation alone that this wasn't a suggestion. Bullet and his friends retreated, grumbling threats, but unwilling to challenge someone who clearly outranked them in the valley's social hierarchy. The newcomer's savior turned to him and introduced himself. His name was Diego. He was a shadow in the old camp, which meant he held a respected position in Gomez's organization. His job, among other things, was to welcome new prisoners and guide them to the camp. Diego's welcome speech was direct and practical. He explained the basic facts of life in the valley. There were 3 camps. The newcomer would need to join one of them because survival alone was impossible. The valley was full of dangerous creatures, scavengers, lurkers, snappers, and worse things deeper in the territory. Without the protection of a camp, without allies to watch your back, a lone prisoner wouldn't last a week. Diego recommended the old camp naturally, since that was his home. He suggested the newcomer follow him there and see what opportunities Gomez's organization could offer. Then Diego left, heading down the path toward the old camp, clearly expecting the newcomer to follow. And this is where the true journey began. The Nameless Hero, as he would eventually become known, found himself alone at the exchange place where prisoners first entered the valley. He had a letter for the fire mages. He had vague instructions to join a camp, and he had no idea what awaited him. The smart move would be to follow Diego's advice, head straight to the old camp and try to find a place in their hierarchy. But something about blind obedience to the first person he met felt wrong. Maybe he wanted to see the valley for himself first. Maybe he wanted to understand his options before committing to any particular camp. Maybe he just wanted to prove that he could survive on his own. Whatever his reasoning, the Nameless Hero set out to explore. He followed rough paths through the wilderness, encountering his first real taste of the valley's dangers. Mole rats, cat-sized rodents with diseased bites, scavengers, grotesque creatures that traveled in packs and overwhelmed lone prey through numbers. These weren't challenging enemies for someone with basic combat skills, but they were deadly to the unwary or unarmed. The hero picked up a rusty sword he found lying on the ground, discarded or dropped by some previous unfortunate soul, and armed himself for the journey ahead. He encountered other prisoners along the way, Radford and Drax, hunters from the new camp who offered advice on surviving in the wilderness and earning money through selling animal parts. The hero couldn't afford their training yet, but he filed away the information for later. Knowledge, he was learning, was as valuable as weapons in this place. He met members of the old camp's outer ring, the diggers and shadows who lived outside the castle walls and worked the less prestigious but still essential roles in the camp's economy. Eventually, the hero made his way to the old camp proper. The settlement was larger and more organized than he expected. Wooden palisades surrounded the outer ring, where merchants traded goods. Gladiators fought in an arena for the entertainment of guards, and lower-ranking camp members went about their daily business. At the center rose the castle itself, ancient stone walls that had once housed royalty, now serving as headquarters for Gomez's criminal empire. The hero couldn't enter the castle immediately. That privilege had to be earned. Diego explained the process. the test of faith. Before Gomez would grant anyone access to the castle and consider them for membership in his organization, they had to prove themselves. The test involved gathering information about the valley's other camps, making connections with important people, demonstrating value to the old camp's interests. Only after completing this trial would Gomez grant an audience. So the Nameless Hero set out to prove his worth. He took on odd jobs for members of the old camp. He helped resolve disputes. He collected debts. He ran messages. Slowly, painfully, he established himself as someone useful rather than just another mouth to feed. He also took the opportunity to visit the other camps to see what alternatives existed beyond Gomez's organization. The new camp, when he finally reached it, impressed him with its sense of egalitarian camaraderie. Lee's mercenaries were rough men, certainly, but they treated each other as equals rather than as rungs on a social ladder. The rogues who lived there were criminals, yes, but they had codes and principles that went beyond simple self-interest. And the water mages, working tirelessly on their plan to destroy the barrier, offered hope of actual escape, rather than just making life under imprisonment more bearable. The swamp camp presented an entirely different atmosphere. The journey there took the hero through marshlands, where dangerous swamp sharks lurked in murky water. The camp itself sat amid ancient ruins, its inhabitants dressed in simple robes, their eyes distant as if focused on something beyond the physical world. The novices welcomed him with offers of swampweed and explanations of their faith. Uberian, when the hero finally met him, spoke with quiet certainty about the sleeper's promise of salvation. The guru's charisma was undeniable, and his followers clearly drew strength from their beliefs. But something about the situation made the hero uneasy. The other camps dismissed the Brotherhood as harmless lunatics, but there was a power here, a sense of something deeper and potentially more dangerous than anyone realized. After gathering enough information and completing enough tasks, the Nameless Hero returned to the old camp and told Diego he was ready for the test of faith. Diego vouched for him to Xardas, one of Gomez's most trusted guards, who grudgingly agreed to let the newcomer into the castle. The hero delivered the Fire Mage's letter to Milton, a young magician who seemed decent enough, despite his association with Gomez's regime. Then he finally received his audience with the Ore Baron himself. Gomez sat on his throne, surrounded by his lieutenants, radiating menace despite his relatively calm demeanor. He questioned the hero about his connections in the valley, about his usefulness to the old camp's interests. The hero mentioned Diego, Xardas, the various people he'd helped in the Outer Ring. He carefully avoided mentioning Yiberion, since Gomez viewed the Brotherhood with suspicion and contempt. Satisfied that this newcomer had proven himself minimally competent, Gomez made his decision. The hero was accepted as a shadow of the old camp. He received basic armor marking his new status and his first real assignment. Raven, Gomez's right-hand man and chief enforcer, explained the mission. The Sect camp had been growing in influence. Gomez wanted to know what they were planning. The hero was to infiltrate the Brotherhood, gain Uberian's trust, and report back on whatever the swamp camp was doing. This put the hero in an interesting position. He was now officially part of the old camp, with all the protection and resources that provided. But he'd also been ordered to investigate the very camp that might hold keys to understanding the valley's deeper mysteries. And whether he fully realized it yet, he was about to discover that the Brotherhood of the Sleeper was far more than a group of harmless religious fanatics smoking swamp weed in the marsh. The Brotherhood's awakening, the Nameless Hero's investigation into the Sect camp, began like any other intelligence gathering operation. He traveled to the swamps, presented himself to the Brotherhood as someone interested in their teachings, and asked what he needed to do to earn Euberion's attention. The novices gave him simple tasks at first: collect swampweed, help guard the camp perimeter, show dedication to their way of life. The hero went through the motions, playing the role of a potential convert, while mentally cataloguing everything he saw for his eventual report to Gomez. But then Euberion called for him personally. The highest guru wanted to speak with the newcomer who had been showing such dedication to the Brotherhood. When the hero entered Euberion's presence in the ancient temple at the camp's heart, he found himself face to face with a man who radiated quiet authority and absolute conviction. Euberion didn't waste time with pleasantries or recruitment speeches. He had a task for someone capable, and the hero had proven himself more capable than most novices. Euberion explained that the Brotherhood was preparing for a momentous event. They were going to perform an invocation, a ritual that would allow them to commune directly with the sleeper, not through dreams or visions, but face to face, spirit to spirit. For this ritual to succeed, they needed several critical components. The first was a focus stone, one of the ancient magical artifacts used to create the barrier. Euberion had received a vision showing him where to find one, and he wanted the hero to retrieve it. The hero accepted the mission, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly because refusing would have blown his cover. Euberion gave him a map marking the location of the focus stone. It lay in a dangerous area, but Euberion had faith the hero could succeed. And so began a journey that would take the Nameless Hero far beyond the safe territories around the camps, into lands where creatures deadlier than scavengers and mole rats waited. The first focus stone location that Euberion marked was near a troll canyon. Trolls, the hero quickly learned, were not creatures to fight if any alternative existed. These massive beasts possessed incredible strength and thick hides that turned aside normal weapons. Fortunately, the focus stone itself was accessible without engaging the troll directly, though the approach required careful navigation and more than a little luck. The focus stone, when the hero finally claimed it, was a crystalline artifact that hummed with contained energy. He could feel the power radiating from it even through its inert state. This was technology or magic far beyond anything the current era could produce. These stones had been created by an ancient civilization, their purpose and methods lost to time. Now they served as anchors for the barrier, but Euberion believed they could be used for something else entirely. The hero returned to the swamp camp and delivered the focus stone to Euberion. The guru examined it with reverent care, then handed it to Kor Kalom, the Brotherhood's master alchemist. Kor Kalom was a figure quite different from Euberion. where the highest guru maintained an air of serene wisdom, Kor Kalom radiated obsessive intensity. His eyes had a feverish quality that suggested someone who had delved too deeply into forbidden knowledge. He took the focus stone and explained what else would be needed for the invocation ritual. First, they needed the almanac, a holy text that contained the proper prayers and incantations for communicating with the sleeper. The almanac had been stolen from the Brotherhood some time ago, and Kor Kalom believed it was now in the old camp. The hero would need to recover it. Second, they needed a special form of Mindcrawler secretion, far purer and more potent than what the Templars normally collected. This meant venturing into the old mine's deepest levels and finding the source of the Mindcrawler infestation. The hero set out to complete these tasks. The almanac proved relatively straightforward to recover, though it required some political maneuvering in the old camp. The Mindcrawler quest, however, tested him in ways the focus stone retrieval never had. Mindcrawlers were arthropod creatures that infested the mines throughout the valley. They were roughly man-sized, with multiple legs, sharp mandibles, and the ability to spit poison. Most prisoners feared them, and with good reason. Mindcrawler attacks could overwhelm unprepared victims, and their poison caused excruciating pain and weakness. The Templars of the Sect camp had learned to collect the secretions from Mindcrawler mandibles for use in their sacred potions, but what Kor Kalom needed was something different. He needed eggs from the Mindcrawler queen. The old mine's deepest levels had been partially abandoned because of Mindcrawler infestation. The diggers refused to work there. Guards avoided the area. Only a few Templars from the Brotherhood ventured into those tunnels, trading their combat skills and swamp weed to the old camp in exchange for access to Mindcrawler territory. When the hero arrived at the old mine with his mission from Yiberian, the mine boss Ian was initially unhelpful. The hero would need to prove his value before Ian would authorize access to the sealed sections where the Mindcrawlers nested. What followed was a series of increasingly dangerous expeditions into the mine's depths. The hero repaired machinery, collected payment from recalcitrant diggers, and generally made himself useful to the old mine's operation. Eventually, Ian agreed to let him attempt to reach the Mindcrawler nest. The gate that sealed off the infested tunnels was opened, but only after the hero recruited several Templars to serve as backup. The tunnels beyond the gate were dark, claustrophobic, and filled with Mindcrawlers. The hero fought his way through the passages, the Templars supporting him when numbers threatened to overwhelm them. Finally, deep in the mine's bowels, they found it. The Queen's Chamber, a massive cavern where the Mindcrawler Queen, too large to move, sat surrounded by her offspring. The Queen itself wasn't particularly dangerous. It couldn't leave its position, and its attacks were slow and predictable, but killing it required patience and persistence, hacking away at its armored hide while dodging its claws. When the Queen finally died, the hero collected several of her eggs, just as Kor Kalom had requested. He also took the opportunity to gather other Mindcrawler parts, plates from their shells, secretion from their glands. These would have value later, he suspected. The journey back to the surface was easier now that the Queen was dead and most of her offspring had been slain. The Templars returned to their posts, and the hero made his way back to the swamp camp. Kor Kalom received the Mindcrawler eggs with barely contained excitement. Combined with the focus stone and the almanac, everything was now ready. Uberion announced that the invocation would take place that night. The entire Brotherhood would gather at the temple. They would witness the moment when their god, the Sleeper, finally spoke to them directly through Uberion. As night fell, the Brotherhood assembled. Novices, Templars, and Gurus all gathered in the ancient temple and on the grounds surrounding it. Uberion stood at the temple's entrance, flanked by Kor Kalom and Kor Angar, the Templar leader. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The hero watched from the crowd as Uberion raised his hands and began the invocation. The ritual started calmly enough. Uberion recited prayers from the almanac. Kor Kalom held the focus stone, directing its energy according to formulas he'd spent months preparing. The swampweed that every Brotherhood member had consumed helped open their minds to the spiritual realm. Uberion's voice grew louder, more intense. He called out to the Sleeper, begging for a sign, demanding that their god reveal itself. And something answered. The change was immediate and terrifying. Uberion's eyes went wide. His body went rigid. The focus stone in Kor Kalom's hands began to glow with an unhealthy red light. Uberion screamed, not in triumph, but in agony and horror. The vision he was receiving wasn't the benevolent message they expected. It was something else entirely. Lightning cracked across the sky despite the clear night. The ground shook. Rocks tumbled from the cliff faces overlooking the temple. One massive boulder crashed down directly onto the temple structure, destroying one of the ancient pillars and sending dust and debris into the air. Uberion collapsed, falling to the ground as if his strings had been cut. Kor Angar immediately rushed to his leader's side. The Templar leader cradled Uberion's head, trying to revive him. Kor Kalom stood frozen, the focus stone still clutched in his hands, his eyes distant, as if he too had seen something in the vision. The Brotherhood members stood in shocked silence, unsure what had just happened. Uberion lived, but barely. Kor Angar carried him into the temple, while the hero and other camp members could only watch. The invocation had succeeded in the sense that contact was made. But whatever the Sleeper had shown Uberion, it wasn't the salvation and freedom they had anticipated. In the days that followed, Uberion remained unconscious, hovering between life and death. Kor Angar tended to him, trying every healing method the Brotherhood knew. Kor Kalom retreated into his laboratory, obsessively studying the focus stone and muttering to himself. The Brotherhood's faith was shaken. Some novices began to question whether they had been wrong. Others doubled down on their beliefs, insisting that this was a test. The hero reported to Kor Angar, asking what he could do to help. The Templar leader explained that Uberion had received a vision during the invocation. He saw an orc in a cemetery, the ancient burial ground, where the orcs of this valley had laid their dead to rest centuries ago. Kor Angar believed this vision was significant, that it might hold answers to what went wrong with the ritual. He asked the hero to investigate the orc cemetery and discover what Uberion had seen. The orc cemetery lay in dangerous territory, far from any of the camps. the hero set out with a small group of Templars, including Baal Lucor, a powerful warrior who had volunteered to help solve this mystery. The journey took them through lands prowled by orcs themselves, the valley's other major threat besides wild creatures. The orcs who lived in the Valley of Mines were slaves, supposedly, though they fought with a ferocity that suggested something more complex than simple captivity. The cemetery itself was a sprawling necropolis, ancient stone tombs and markers dating back longer than any human settlement in the valley. The air felt heavy here, oppressive. The Templars spread out to search for whatever Wiberian's vision had indicated. But something was wrong. The orcs guarding this place weren't behaving like the relatively predictable creatures the hero had encountered elsewhere. These orcs fought with desperate intensity, as if protecting something sacred. The expedition turned into a bloodbath. The Templars, skilled warriors though they were, found themselves overwhelmed. One by one, they fell until only the hero and Baal Lucor remained. But Lucor had been struck by something during the fighting. A psychic attack, perhaps, or exposure to some malign influence. His mind began to crack. He started muttering about voices, about the sleeper calling to him. His eyes took on the same feverish quality the hero had seen in Kor Kalom. Lucor attacked. The hero had no choice but to defend himself. The fight was brutal and tragic, ending with Baal Lucor's death on the cemetery grounds. The hero, now alone and surrounded by hostile territory, searched desperately for whatever had caused this catastrophe, and he found it. Among the ancient tombs stood a shrine, older even than the cemetery itself. Orcish script covered its surface, prayers and warnings carved into stone that had weathered centuries. The hero couldn't read the text, but the images were clear enough. They showed an ancient ritual, 5 orc shamans summoning something from beyond the world. They showed the thing they summoned, a massive demonic entity. They showed the orcs worshipping it, bringing it sacrifices. And they showed, in the final panel, the shamans sealing the demon away in terror of what they had unleashed. The truth crashed down on the hero with horrible clarity. The sleeper wasn't a benevolent god. It was a demon, an ancient evil that had been imprisoned beneath the valley centuries ago. The Brotherhood had been manipulated, their faith twisted to serve something that had no intention of saving them. Wiberian's vision hadn't been a blessing. It had been the demon trying to corrupt him, to use him as a tool for its own escape. The hero fled the cemetery, running through orc-infested territory with this knowledge burning in his mind. He had to get back to the swamp camp. He had to warn Kor Angar. Maybe there was still time to prevent whatever the sleeper was planning. But when he reached the swamp camp, he found Kor Angar alone in the temple with Wiberian's body. The highest guru had died. In his final moments of consciousness, Wiberian had revealed the same truth the hero had discovered. The sleeper was not a god, it was a demon, and they had been helping it prepare for something terrible. Worse, Kor Kalom was gone. The alchemist had taken several devoted Templars and novices and vanished into the valley, muttering about serving the sleeper more directly. The psychic influence that had driven Baal Lucor mad had claimed Kor Kalom completely. Whatever happened next, the sleeper now had willing servants actively working to free it. Core anger, grief-stricken and desperate, explained to the hero that Uberian had mentioned something else before dying. If the sleeper couldn't be stopped through faith or prayer, then perhaps the new camp's plan offered the only hope. The water mages believed they could destroy the barrier with their ore explosion. If they succeeded, everyone could escape before the sleeper broke free. Or maybe, just maybe, destroying the barrier would also destroy whatever power the demon had over the valley. The hero left the swamp camp with his mission clear. He needed to help the water mages complete their plan. He needed to find the remaining focus stones and help Xardas attempt the impossible. Because if they failed, if the barrier remained and the sleeper continued to grow in power, then everyone in the valley was doomed to something far worse than imprisonment. The water mage's plan. The hero made his way to the new camp, ready to offer his services to the water mages. He found Xardas in the restricted area where the magicians maintained their laboratories and research facilities. The water mage leader listened to the hero's story with growing concern. The sleeper, focus stones being used for invocations, the Brotherhood's corruption. This changed everything. Xardas explained that the water mage's escape plan had been progressing slowly. They had gathered considerable amounts of ore from the free mine, piling it into a massive mound that glowed with accumulated magical energy. But they still needed all 5 focus stones to properly channel the detonation. Uberian's focus stone, the one the hero had retrieved from the Troll Canyon, could be repurposed for their ritual, but they needed the other 4. The hero accepted this new mission. Finding the focus stones would take him to the furthest reaches of the valley, to places even more dangerous than the Orc Cemetery. But there was no alternative. Xardas gave him an old map showing where the focus stones had originally been placed when the barrier was created. The stones should still be near those locations, he theorized, though retrieving them would require overcoming whatever guardians or obstacles had developed over the past decade. The quest for the focus stones became the hero's primary focus. Each stone was hidden in a location more treacherous than the last. One lay in a mountain fortress that required climbing sheer cliffs and fighting through creatures that had made the ruins their home. Another was beneath the Ring of Stone, a massive circular rock formation in the center of the valley where the most dangerous monsters gathered. A third required entering a ruined monastery that had collapsed into a cave system. And the fourth, the one Uberian had found, had already been delivered to the swamp camp and could be retrieved. These expeditions tested the hero's combat skills and resourcefulness. He fought trolls, shadow beasts, and creatures even more exotic. He navigated ancient architectural puzzles that had been designed to keep intruders away from the focus stones. He used telekinesis scrolls to reach stones placed in impossible locations. Slowly, painfully, he gathered all 5 artifacts and brought them to Xardas. The water mages received the focus stones with barely restrained excitement. They had everything they needed now. The ore mound was large enough. The focus stones could be positioned around it to properly channel the blast. All that remained was performing the actual ritual to trigger the detonation. But there was a problem. Xardas explained that the ritual required cooperation between fire and water mages. The two schools of magic needed to work together, channeling different aspects of the arcane energy to create a stable explosion rather than a chaotic release that might fail to damage the barrier at all. The fire mages lived in the old camp under Gomez's protection, and Gomez, who profited greatly from the current arrangement with King Robar, had no interest in destroying the barrier. The hero would need to travel to the old camp and convince the fire mages to help. This should have been straightforward. After all, the fire mages were prisoners like everyone else. They wanted to escape. They should have been eager to assist with any plan that might break the barrier. But when the hero arrived at the old camp, he discovered a crisis. The old mine had collapsed. The tunnels that had produced the majority of the valley's ore for the past decade had become unstable and dangerous. Cave-ins sealed major passages. Mine crawlers and worse creatures moved into the empty spaces. Production came to a complete halt, and without ore from the old mine, Gomez had nothing to trade with King Robar. The Ore Baron, faced with losing his position and power, made a desperate decision. If he couldn't provide ore from the old mine, he would take ore from the free mine. He ordered his guards to attack the new camp and seize their mine by force. This wasn't negotiation or politics, it was war. The fire mages, led by Callisto, opposed this plan. They argued that attacking the new camp would only make the situation worse. They pointed out that cooperation between the camps was necessary if anyone wanted to escape the valley. They even went so far as to explicitly support the water mage's plan to destroy the barrier. Callisto and his colleagues stood up to Gomez, demanding that he reconsider. Gomez's response was swift and brutal. He ordered the execution of every fire mage in the old camp. His guards stormed the mage's temple and cut them down before they could mount a defense. Callisto died trying to protect his students. The other fire mages fell with him. Only Milton survived, and only because he had been outside the camp when the massacre occurred. When the hero arrived at the old camp's gates, the guards recognized him as a traitor. He'd been working with the new camp. He'd helped gather focus stones for the water mage's plan, and now he was effectively sentenced to death on sight. The castle gates slammed shut. Guards pursued him through the outer ring. The hero barely escaped with his life. He met Diego at a prearranged spot outside the camp. His old mentor explained what had happened: the massacre, the planned attack on the free mine, Gomez's descent into paranoid tyranny. Diego also revealed that he and several others had been preparing for this. Milton, Lester from the swamp camp, Gorn from the new camp, and Diego himself had formed a quiet alliance. They recognized that the hero was something special, that he might be the one person capable of actually changing things, and they were ready to help him. But first, they needed to save the new camp. Gomez's forces were already marching toward the free mine. The hero rushed to warn Lee and help prepare defenses. The battle for the free mine was bloody but brief. The hero and the new camp's mercenaries fought off the old camp's guards, killing many and driving the rest back. Gomez's power play had failed. With the immediate crisis resolved, the hero turned his attention back to the original problem. They needed fire mages to complete the barrier-breaking ritual. But all the fire mages were dead except Milton, and Milton alone might not be enough. Xardas, when informed of the situation, looked grim. He suggested there might be one other option. There was a 13th mage who had helped create the barrier, a magician who had left the old camp years ago and built himself a tower in the most dangerous part of the valley. This mage was a necromancer, practiced in the darkest arts, and had no particular loyalty to any camp. But he might know more about the barrier than anyone else alive. His name was Xardas, the necromancer's tower. Xardas directed the hero to seek Xardas's tower deep in Orc territory. The journey would be perilous beyond anything the hero had faced. The Orcish lands in the southern part of the valley were essentially no-go zones for humans. Orcs patrolled the area in force. Their war camps dotted the landscape, and the creatures that lived among them were even more dangerous than the trolls and shadow beasts elsewhere. But there was no alternative. If Xardas could help them understand the barrier, maybe they could find another way to destroy it, even without the fire mage's cooperation. And if not, then at least they would know what they were truly dealing with. The hero set out from the old camp, or what remained of it. He avoided the main gates where Gomez's guards still watched for him. Instead, he slipped through a less guarded entrance and made his way into the wilderness. The path to Orc territory took him past familiar landmarks. The stone ring where he'd found one focus stone, the canyon where trolls roamed, the old castle ruins that marked the transition from human-dominated areas to Orcish land. Beyond those ruins, the landscape changed. The vegetation became denser, the air felt heavier, and orcs were everywhere. The hero had fought orcs before, but those encounters had been against isolated individuals or small patrols. Here, in their own territory, the orcs moved in organized groups. Orc scouts watched from high ground. Orc warriors guarded key passages, and deeper in, near what the hero assumed was their city, Orc elites patrolled with weapons that gleamed with their own dark enchantments. The hero used every bit of stealth and cunning he'd developed. He avoided patrols where possible. He struck from shadows when avoidance was impossible. He used transformation scrolls and invisibility potions, rare items he'd been hoarding for emergencies. This definitely qualified as an emergency. Finally, after hours of terrifying navigation through enemy territory, the hero spotted Xardas's tower. It rose from a bleak plateau, a dark stone structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Undead creatures patrolled the area around the tower. Skeletons in rusted armor shuffled along predetermined paths. Zombies stood at attention near the entrance. This wasn't just a mage's laboratory. It was a fortress defended by the very dead themselves. The hero approached cautiously, expecting the undead to attack, but they ignored him completely, as if he posed no threat, or perhaps as if they had been instructed not to harm visitors. The tower's heavy door stood slightly ajar. The hero pushed it open and entered. Inside, the tower was exactly what one might expect from a necromancer's lair. Skulls lined the shelves, ancient books bound in leather that might not have come from animals filled a massive library. Magical implements covered every available surface. And at the center of the main chamber, standing before a table covered in arcane diagrams, was Xardas himself. The necromancer was older than the hero expected. His hair and beard had gone completely white. Deep lines marked his face, the result of decades studying magics that most mages refused to even acknowledge existed. But his eyes were sharp and penetrating, missing nothing. When he turned to regard the hero, those eyes seemed to look straight through him, examining not just his body, but his very soul. Xardas spoke first. His voice was surprisingly calm, almost gentle despite the grim surroundings. He welcomed the hero to his tower and asked what brought a prisoner all this way into such dangerous territory. The hero explained everything: the Brotherhood's invocation, Uberian's death, the revelation that the sleeper was a demon rather than a god, the water mages' plan to destroy the barrier, the massacre of the fire mages, all of it. Xardas listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if confirming things he already suspected. When the hero finished, the necromancer sighed heavily. He gestured for the hero to sit, then began to explain the truth behind everything that had happened in the Valley of Mines over the past decade. The barrier, Xardas revealed, hadn't been created by the 12 mages alone. They had used a pre-existing power source, something that was already in the valley before King Robar ever decided to establish his prison colony. That power source was the sleeper itself. The demon had been sealed beneath the valley by ancient orc shamans, but its power continued to radiate through the earth. When the 12 mages performed their ritual, they unknowingly tapped into that demonic energy. That's why the spell went wrong. That's why the barrier expanded beyond control. The sleeper's influence had corrupted the casting from the very beginning. Everything that followed, Xardas continued, had been orchestrated by the demon. The sleeper couldn't break free of its prison through force. The orc shaman's seal was too strong for that, but it could influence the dreams and thoughts of those above it. It whispered to Wyberion, planted visions that would lead him to establish the Brotherhood. It guided Corcalon's research, ensuring the alchemist would develop rituals that channeled more and more power toward the demon's prison. The invocation hadn't been a failed attempt at divine communication. It had been a deliberate act of corruption, the sleeper reaching out to claim more servants for its eventual escape. The hero asked the obvious question: how could they stop it? If the sleeper was this powerful even while imprisoned, what chance did a few prisoners have against it? Xardas smiled grimly at that. He had been waiting for someone to ask that question. He had spent the entire 10 years of imprisonment studying the barrier, the valley's ancient history, and the nature of the entity sealed beneath them. And he had discovered something remarkable. There was a way to defeat the sleeper, not to simply reseal it, but to banish it completely, to destroy it so thoroughly that it could never threaten anyone again. The necromancer moved to a corner of his laboratory where a sword hung on the wall. It was an unusual weapon, its blade dark and inscribed with runes that seemed to shift and move when looked at directly. Xardas carefully lifted the sword down and presented it to the hero. This, Xardas explained, was Uriziel, a legendary weapon forged centuries ago, specifically to combat demonic entities. The sword had been lost for generations, buried in ancient ruins where Xardas had discovered it during his researches. But Uriziel alone wouldn't be enough to defeat the Sleeper. The sword needed to be empowered, charged with enough magical energy to strike at a demon of the Sleeper's magnitude. To empower Uriziel, they would need to perform a series of rituals at specific locations throughout the valley. These rituals would channel arcane energy from the focus stones into the sword itself, gradually building up its power until it could serve as a weapon capable of banishing demons. It would be dangerous. The rituals would alert the Sleeper to what they were planning, and once the demon knew someone was actively working to destroy it, it would do everything in its power to stop them. But this was the only way. The water mage's plan to destroy the barrier through an ore explosion wouldn't work. Even if they succeeded in breaking the magical field, that would only free the Sleeper. Without the barrier's energy suppressing it, the demon would break free of the shaman's seal immediately and wreak havoc on the world beyond the valley. No, the only path forward was to face the Sleeper directly, to descend into its prison beneath the earth, and to destroy it with Uriziel before it could escape. The hero accepted Uriziel from Xardas. The sword felt strange in his hands, heavier than its size suggested, but also somehow alive, as if it recognized the purpose for which it had been created. Xardas provided detailed instructions for the empowerment rituals and warned the hero of what to expect once the sword was fully charged. The final battle would take place in the Temple of the Sleeper, deep beneath the earth in catacombs that predated human civilization in this region. There, the hero would face not just the demon itself, but also the 5 undead orc shamans who had originally sealed it. Only by defeating all of them and collecting their hearts could the hero break the seal and confront the Sleeper directly. The hero left Xardas's tower with Uriziel at his side and a clear mission before him. He had to perform the empowerment rituals. He had to gather allies who could help him survive the descent into the Temple of the Sleeper. And he had to do all of this while Kor Kalom and his corrupted followers worked to free the demon. The path forward had never been more dangerous or more critical. The empowerment of Uriziel. The empowerment rituals took the hero back to locations he'd already visited during his quest for the focus stones. But this time, he wasn't simply retrieving artifacts. He was channeling the raw magical energy that flowed through the valley into Uriziel itself, transforming the ancient blade into a weapon of demon-slaying power. The first ritual required returning to the Ring of Stone, that massive circular formation in the valley's center. The hero stood at the formation's heart. Uriziel planted point first into the earth. He spoke the incantation Xardas had taught him, words in a language older than the kingdom of Mirtana. The focus stone nearest to the Ring of Stone began to glow. Energy arced from it to the sword. Lightning made of pure arcane force. The sword absorbed the power, its runes glowing brighter as the ritual progressed. When the first ritual concluded, Uriziel felt different, warmer, more responsive. The hero could sense the weapon's growing potency. But this was only the beginning. 4 more rituals remained, each one more dangerous than the last. because with each completed empowerment, the sleeper became more aware of the threat. Strange events began occurring throughout the valley. Prisoners reported nightmares more vivid and disturbing than usual. Animals behaved erratically, sometimes attacking in coordinated groups that suggested intelligence beyond their normal capacity. And most disturbing of all, some individuals began acting as if possessed, speaking in voices not their own and making cryptic warnings about the sleeper's inevitable triumph. Kor Kalom and his followers became more active. They established a base in the old mine, occupying the deepest chambers where the hero had slain the minecrawler queen. They performed their own rituals there, counter-rituals designed to strengthen the sleeper rather than prepare to fight it. When scouts from the old camp investigated the strange lights and sounds coming from the mine's depths, they found the passages guarded by Templars who attacked on sight. The mine, already unstable and dangerous, had become completely impassable for anyone except Kor Kalom's cult. The hero continued his work undeterred. The second ritual took place near the ruins of the old fortress, where he'd found another focus stone. The third occurred in the swamp itself, dangerously close to the Brotherhood's temple, where Kor Anga now struggled to maintain order among the surviving followers. The fourth ritual happened on the mountain heights, where the wind howled and the air grew thin. And the fifth, the final empowerment, required descending into a cave system so deep that the sunlight never reached it. Each ritual made Uriziel stronger. By the time the fifth was complete, the sword blazed with barely contained power. Looking at it directly hurt the eyes. Holding it made the hero's arm tingle with arcane energy. The weapon was ready. Now the hero needed to be ready as well. He gathered his allies, Diego, who had remained loyal throughout everything, despite it costing him his position in the old camp. Milton, the sole surviving fire mage, who had learned enough about necromancy from Xardas to be useful in the battles ahead. Gorn from the new camp, a massive warrior whose strength and combat prowess were unmatched among the prisoners. Lester, a former member of the Brotherhood who had turned away from the sleeper after Yuberian's death. And others who had proven themselves during the conflicts between the camps. This group, this fellowship of prisoners who had nothing in common except their desire to survive, prepared for the descent into the temple of the sleeper. Xardas provided what magical support he could, crafting scrolls and potions that would be essential in the battles ahead. The water mages, though their original plan had been abandoned, offered their knowledge of the focus stones and how the temple's magical defenses likely functioned. Even Lee, the former Lord Commander, offered advice on combat tactics against numerically superior foes. The entrance to the Temple of the Sleeper lay beneath the old mine, not in the sections Kor Kalom's cultists occupied, but in even older passages that had been sealed decades or perhaps centuries ago. The hero and his companions broke through the seal and descended into darkness that had known no living presence in living memory. The catacombs were vast beyond imagining. Chamber after chamber of ancient stone, carved with Orcish script and decorated with images of rituals and sacrifices. The air was cold and dead, thick with the weight of centuries, and everywhere the dead walked. Undead orcs guarded the passages. Not shambling zombies like those Xardas commanded, but skeletal warriors still possessed of combat skill and intelligence. They wielded weapons of ancient make, bronze and stone rather than steel, but enchanted to never break and never dull. The hero and his companions fought their way deeper, each battle testing their endurance and resolve. They found chambers filled with treasures, offerings made to the sleeper in centuries past by orcs who had worshipped it before realizing its true nature: gold, gems, weapons of power. The hero took only what would be useful in combat, leaving the rest untouched. Greed had no place here. Survival was the only goal that mattered. Deeper still, they encountered the first of the 5 shamans. These weren't skeletal warriors. They were something else entirely. Corpses preserved by dark magic and still animated by residual willpower. Each shaman was a powerful spellcaster in its own right, commanding elemental forces and curse magic that could kill with a gesture. The battles against the shamans were brutal. One by one, the hero's companions fell back, too injured or exhausted to continue. Milton collapsed after helping defeat the second shaman, his magical reserves completely spent. Gorn took a cursed blade through the shoulder during the fight with the third, the wound too severe for him to keep fighting effectively. By the time the hero reached the 5th and final shaman, he was essentially alone. Diego remained, but barely conscious, leaning heavily on his sword. The hero faced the last shaman in a circular chamber that served as the antechamber to the demon's prison. This wasn't just a test of combat prowess, it was a test of will, of determination, of whether one human prisoner could stand against centuries of accumulated dark power. The fight lasted until both combatants were on the verge of collapse. The hero's armor was dented and torn. Blood ran from wounds he barely remembered receiving. But Uriziel never faltered. The empowered blade cut through the shaman's magical defenses. It shattered protective wards that should have turned aside any weapon. And finally, with one decisive strike, the hero severed the final shaman's connection to the magic, sustaining its undead existence. The shaman collapsed, truly dead at last. The hero cut out its heart, adding it to the collection he'd gathered from the other 4. With all 5 hearts in his possession, the seal on the sleeper's prison could be broken. There was no turning back now. The hero helped Diego to his feet and told his friend to return to the surface with the others. This final battle wasn't something companions could help with. This was between the hero and the demon. Diego tried to protest, tried to insist he could still fight, but the hero wouldn't hear it. He'd lost too many people already. He wouldn't risk anyone else in what came next. Alone, the hero approached the final door. It was massive, carved from a single piece of stone that must have weighed tons. Orcish runes covered its surface, the shaman's seal that had held the sleeper for centuries. The hero placed the 5 hearts at specific points around the door, following the pattern Xardas had described. The hearts dissolved into pools of dark energy. The runes on the door flickered and died, and with a grinding sound like the earth itself protesting, the door swung open. Beyond lay the sleeper's prison, the demon's prison. The chamber that served as the sleeper's prison existed outside normal space. The hero knew this intellectually, but experiencing it was something else entirely. The moment he stepped through the door, physical reality seemed to twist around him. The walls, floor, and ceiling all appeared to be made of dark red stone that pulsed with organic rhythm, as if the room itself was alive and breathing. The air was thick and hot, each breath feeling like inhaling smoke from a funeral pyre. At the center of the chamber, suspended in chains of pure energy, was the sleeper itself. The demon was massive, easily 3 times the height of a man. Its body was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Too many joints in the limbs, muscles that moved beneath skin the color of dried blood, a head crowned with twisted horns, and eyes, gods, those eyes. They burned with an intelligence that was ancient beyond human comprehension, malevolent beyond any mortal evil. When the sleeper's gaze fell upon the hero, it felt like being examined by something that saw not just his body, but every thought, every fear, every weakness he'd ever possessed. The demon spoke. Its voice resonated not through the air, but directly in the hero's mind, bypassing ears entirely and speaking to something deeper. It asked the hero why he had come. It already knew, of course. The sleeper had been watching through its corrupted servants. It had seen everything, but it wanted to hear the hero say it, wanted to taste the defiance that had brought this one mortal all the way into the depths of its prison. The hero raised Uriziel and gave his answer. He had come to destroy the demon, to end its threat forever, to ensure it could never manipulate or harm anyone again. The sleeper laughed. The sound was horrible, like metal scraping against stone mixed with the screams of the dying. It told the hero that Uriziel, for all its power, was just a sword, a tool, and tools were only as effective as the hands that wielded them. How could one human, one insignificant prisoner, hope to defeat a being that had existed since before his ancestors learned to make fire? How could mortal strength stand against immortal power? The hero didn't bother arguing. He charged. The battle that followed defied easy description. The sleeper, despite being chained, could still attack. It commanded demonic magic that warped reality itself. Fire that burned cold rather than hot erupted from its gestures. Shadows took physical form and struck with bladed appendages. The very air became a weapon. Pressure waves that could crush bone and rupture organs. The hero dodged, blocked, and endured. Uriziel deflected magical attacks that should have been impossible to parry. The sword's edge bit into the demon's flesh, drawing blood that steamed and hissed when it struck the floor. Each wound made the sleeper scream in rage, the sound threatening to shatter the hero's mind. But the demon was weakening. The shaman's seal, even broken, had left its mark. Centuries of imprisonment had diminished the sleeper's power, and Uriziel, empowered by the valley's focus stones and forged specifically to combat demonic entities, was the perfect weapon for this fight. The hero pressed his advantage, driving forward despite exhaustion and wounds. The sleeper changed tactics. It spoke directly into the hero's mind, offering bargains. It could give him power beyond imagination. It could free him from the valley. It could make him a king, a god, anything he desired. All he had to do was stop fighting, put down the sword, and serve. The hero ignored every offer. He'd seen what serving the sleeper led to: Uberian's death, Kor Kalom's madness, Baal Lukor's corruption. The demon's promises were lies, and even if they weren't, some prices were too high to pay. The final strike came almost without warning. The hero found an opening in the demon's defenses, a moment when it overextended while casting a particularly powerful spell. Uriziel thrust forward, the blade piercing the sleeper's chest and emerging from its back. The empowered sword blazed with light so intense it turned the red chamber white. The demon shrieked, its voice tearing through the psychic realm and probably echoing throughout the valley above. The sleeper's form began to dissolve, not dying exactly, because demons didn't die in the way mortals understood death, but banished, cast back into whatever dimension it had originally been summoned from. The chains that had held it shattered. The chamber itself started to collapse, reality reasserting itself, now that the demon's presence was being removed. The hero pulled Uriziel free and ran. He sprinted back through the collapsing catacombs, racing against the total destruction of the temple. Stones fell from the ceiling. Walls crumbled. The entire structure was coming down. He found his companions where he'd left them, still recovering from their battles. Together, they fled toward the surface. The old mine was collapsing too. The temple's destruction was triggering a chain reaction, destabilizing the entire underground structure. Tunnels caved in. Diggers and guards who had been working above fled in panic. The hero and his companions emerged just in time to see the mine entrance collapse completely, sealing the catacombs forever beneath tons of rubble. But something else was happening. The barrier, that invisible dome that had imprisoned the valley for 10 years, began to shimmer visibly. Cracks appeared in the magical structure. Energy leaked out in brilliant displays of color. And then, with a sound like reality itself breaking, the barrier shattered completely. For the first time in a decade, the Valley of Mines was open to the outside world. Freedom and aftermath. The collapse of the barrier didn't bring immediate joy. Instead, chaos erupted throughout the valley. The destruction of the temple and the mine created massive structural instabilities. Parts of the valley floor cracked open, revealing caverns and passages that had been hidden for centuries. The ancient ruins, their magical foundations disrupted by the sleeper's banishment, began to crumble, and without the barrier's energy to suppress them, the valley's creatures became even more aggressive and dangerous. The prisoners, suddenly faced with the possibility of actual freedom, didn't know how to react. Some immediately tried to flee, running for the valley's exits, only to find that the paths were blocked by collapsed rock and landslides triggered by the temple's destruction. Others stayed in their camps, uncertain whether the barrier was truly gone or if this was some cruel trick. And a few, those who had spent too long in the valley and had nowhere to go outside it, simply continued their daily routines as if nothing had changed. Gomez's power structure collapsed almost immediately. The old camp, already weakened by internal conflicts and the loss of the old mine, disintegrated. The guards who had supported the Ore Baron fled or turned on each other in struggles for dominance. Gomez himself, according to reports, attempted to reach the outside world with his accumulated wealth, but was killed during the escape attempt, struck by falling rocks or murdered by vengeful prisoners. His body was never found. The new camp fared better. Lee, pragmatic as always, organized his mercenaries to maintain order and protect the route to the valley's northern exit. Under his leadership, prisoners formed organized groups to help clear the paths and rescue those trapped by cave-ins. The former Lord Commander proved that his military skills hadn't diminished during his years of imprisonment. The Sect camp suffered perhaps the worst fate. The temple that had served as the Brotherhood's center collapsed completely, burying the ancient ruins under rubble. Core anger led the surviving Brotherhood members away from the swamps, though many had lost their faith entirely after learning the truth about the Sleeper. Some joined the new camp, others struck out on their own. The Brotherhood of the Sleeper, as an organization, effectively ceased to exist. Kor Kalon and his corrupted followers were never seen again. Whether they died in the temple's collapse, fled into the deepest recesses of the valley's cave systems, or met some other fate, remained unknown. The hero suspected they had perished when the Sleeper was banished, their minds too far gone to survive the demon's destruction. The hero himself, battered and exhausted, made his way back to Xardas' tower. The necromancer greeted him with quiet satisfaction. The destruction of the Sleeper, Xardas explained, would have effects far beyond the Valley of Mines. The demon's influence had been spreading slowly through the orc forces outside the valley, corrupting their shamans and preparing for a larger invasion. With the Sleeper gone, that plan had failed. The war between Murtana and the orcs would continue, but at least now humanity faced natural enemies rather than demon-corrupted ones. Xardas also revealed something the hero hadn't known. The necromancer himself had engineered some of the events that led to the hero's success. It was Xardas who had suggested to the fire mage outside the valley that someone should carry a letter to the trapped magicians. It was Xardas who had been manipulating certain circumstances behind the scenes, ensuring the hero would have opportunities to prove himself and gather allies. The necromancer had seen something in the nameless prisoner from the beginning, some quality that marked him as potentially capable of facing the Sleeper. Why hadn't Xardas simply done it himself? The necromancer smiled at that question. He was powerful, yes, but he was also marked by his use of necromancy. The Sleeper would have sensed him immediately and marshaled all its power against him. The hero, unmarked by any particular magical signature and underestimated by everyone, had been able to move freely where Xardas could not. Sometimes the key to solving an impossible problem was finding the right person to solve it, not trying to do everything yourself. The hero stayed at Xardas' tower while the valley sorted itself out. Slowly, over the course of several weeks, the situation stabilized. Patrols from King Robar's forces entered the valley, expecting to find chaos and rebellion. Instead, they found prisoners already organizing themselves to leave, eager to return to the outside world, despite knowing they would face legal consequences. King Robar, when he received reports of what had transpired, made a surprising decision. He issued a general amnesty for all prisoners of the Valley of Mines. The official explanation was that they had completed their sentences through their own labor. The unofficial reason, which Lee suggested to the hero, was that the king couldn't afford to admit the barrier's creation had been a catastrophic failure. By declaring the prisoners free, he could spin the narrative as a successful conclusion to the mining operation, rather than acknowledging that his own mages had unleashed a demonic corruption. Not that the king was feeling particularly generous. The fire mages were all dead. The water mages had lost faith in the crown. And Lee, the brilliant military commander who might have turned the tide in the war against the orcs, had no interest in returning to serve a king who had imprisoned him based on false charges. Mirtana's situation remained dire, perhaps even worse than before. The hero, along with Diego, Milton, Gorn, and Lester, prepared to leave the valley. They would go together, at least for a while. Bonds forged in desperate circumstances tended to last, and none of them were eager to separate after everything they'd endured. Xardas bid them farewell with a warning. The sleeper was banished, not destroyed. Demons couldn't be truly killed, only cast back to their home dimensions. Someday, perhaps centuries in the future, the sleeper might find another way to return. Someone would need to be vigilant. Someone would need to remember what happened in the Valley of Mines and ensure it never happened again. The hero promised to remember. Then he turned his back on the valley, on Xardas's tower, and on the barrier that no longer existed. The road ahead led to the kingdom of Mirtana proper, to King Robar's capital, and to whatever future awaited a group of former prisoners who had saved the world from a demon most people didn't even know existed. But that story, the story of what came after, would have to wait for another time. The tale of Gothic ends here, with freedom won and a demon banished, leaving only questions about what would come next in a kingdom still at war and a world still filled with ancient evils waiting for their chance to rise. The people of the valley. Before we conclude, we should spend time understanding the remarkable individuals who inhabited the Valley of Mines. These weren't just background characters or quest givers. Each had their own story, their own motivations, their own reasons for being trapped behind that magical barrier. Understanding them helps us understand why the valley became such a complex society rather than simply descending into total anarchy. Let's start with Diego, the hero's first friend and most consistent ally throughout the entire story. Diego was a shadow in the old camp when the hero first arrived, which meant he'd risen fairly high in Gomez's organization through a combination of competence and political savvy. But Diego's true loyalty was never to Gomez or the camp's power structure. He believed in survival, in making the best of a terrible situation, and in helping people who deserved help. Diego's past before imprisonment was never fully revealed, but hints suggested he'd been a professional criminal of some kind. Not a mindless thug, but someone who had made his living through careful planning and calculated risks. That skill set served him well in the valley, where understanding social dynamics and navigating political dangers was as important as combat prowess. What made Diego special was that he never lost his humanity. He could play the political games necessary to survive in the old camp while still maintaining personal ethics that went beyond simple self-interest. When Diego first helped the hero at the exchange place, it wasn't because he expected payment or loyalty. He did it because letting Bullet and his thugs beat up newcomers was wrong. And Diego still cared about right and wrong despite years in a prison camp. That moral compass, that unwillingness to completely surrender to the valley's brutality, made him an ideal companion for someone who would eventually face down a demon. Then there was Milton, the young fire mage, who survived Gomez's massacre. Milton was interesting because he represented idealism struggling to survive in a place designed to crush it. He genuinely believed in the fire mage's mission to study and preserve magical knowledge. He respected his teachers, particularly Callisto, and tried to live up to their standards, even while trapped in a prison surrounded by criminals. Milton's survival when all the other fire mages died was partly luck, and partly because he'd been away from the camp on an errand. But it also reflected his personality. Milton was curious, always wanting to explore and investigate rather than staying safely behind walls. That curiosity led him to befriend the hero, to learn from Xardas despite the necromancer's dark reputation, and eventually to become one of the few people capable of understanding the magical complexities of the Sleeper's prison. The massacre of the fire mages hit Milton hard. These were his mentors, his friends, his entire social structure. Gomez killed them all simply because they disagreed with his war plans. That moment transformed Milton from an idealistic student into someone who understood that knowledge and power meant nothing without the will to stand up against tyranny. His decision to help the hero wasn't just about escaping the valley. It was about avenging his teachers and ensuring their deaths meant something. Gorn, the massive warrior from the new camp, embodied a different archetype entirely. He was a professional fighter, someone whose entire identity was built around combat prowess. Before his imprisonment, Gorn had likely been a mercenary or gladiator, someone who sold his skills to whoever paid best. The valley's gladiator arena gave him an outlet for that need to prove himself in combat, though he eventually grew disgusted with the arena's culture of fighting purely for entertainment. What made Gorn interesting was his code of honor. He fought, yes, but he fought according to rules. He respected worthy opponents. He despised cruelty for its own sake. When he joined Lee's mercenaries in the new camp, it wasn't just because they paid better than the old camp. It was because Lee led warriors rather than ruling slaves. The new camp's ethos of rough equality appealed to Gorn's sense that strength should be respected, but not worshipped. Gorn's friendship with the hero developed through combat. They fought in the arena. They hunted dangerous creatures together. They defended the free mine against Gomez's attack. For someone like Gorn, that shared combat created bonds stronger than any philosophical or political allegiance. When the time came to descend into the Temple of the Sleeper, Gorn volunteered immediately, not because he understood the magical complexities, but because the hero needed a strong sword arm, and Gorn had the strongest in the valley. Lester represented yet another type of prisoner. He'd been part of the Brotherhood, a true believer in Yuberian's teachings and the Sleeper's promises. Lester had joined the Sect camp because he desperately wanted to believe there was meaning to his imprisonment, that some higher purpose existed beyond just mining ore until he died. The Brotherhood gave him that sense of meaning. The rituals, the meditation, the community of fellow believers, all of it made life in the valley bearable. Euberion's death and the revelation about the sleeper's true nature shattered Lester's worldview. Everything he'd believed was a lie. The God he'd worshipped was actually a demon. The salvation he'd been promised was really damnation. That kind of disillusionment could have destroyed him completely. Many Brotherhood members did fall apart when the truth came out, either going mad or simply giving up on life entirely. But Lester chose differently. He chose to accept the truth and rebuild his understanding of the world around it. He left the swamp camp and began working with Lee's mercenaries, using the combat training he'd received as a Templar for more practical purposes. His magical abilities, learned through the Brotherhood's mind control techniques, proved useful even though he refused to use them in the ways Iberian had taught. Lester's arc was about finding meaning after faith fails, about discovering that purpose comes from actions rather than beliefs. Lee himself deserves extended discussion. The former Lord Commander was arguably the most capable person in the entire valley. His military genius was well established before his imprisonment. King Robar had relied on Lee's strategies to hold back the Orcish invasions. The nobility feared Lee precisely because he was so competent and so honest. A military commander with the king's complete trust and the army's absolute loyalty was dangerous to nobles whose power depended on corruption and political maneuvering. The conspiracy that framed Lee for the queen's murder was elaborate and involved multiple noble families working together. They fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, and manipulated circumstances to make it look like Lee had both means and motive. King Robar, despite his personal belief in Lee's innocence, couldn't ignore the evidence presented. To refuse to punish his Lord Commander would have meant open conflict with the nobility, potentially civil war. So Lee was sentenced to the Valley of Mines, saved from execution only by his years of loyal service. Lee's bitterness about this betrayal was understandable and justified. He'd given everything to Mirtana. He'd sacrificed his own comfort, safety, and future to protect the kingdom, and the kingdom repaid him by destroying his life based on lies. That kind of betrayal could have turned him into a monster, someone consumed by rage and revenge. Some of the old camp's worst guards were men who'd been betrayed and decided to embrace cruelty as a response. But Lee remained principled. He refused to let the nobility's corruption turn him into what they claimed he was. He established the new camp as a place where merit mattered more than politics, where honesty was valued over manipulation. He continued making long-term plans for escape, not because he believed King Robar would pardon him, but because giving up meant admitting the nobles had won. Lee's leadership was about proving that honor and competence weren't weaknesses, even when the world punished you for possessing them. Gomez, by contrast, showed what happened when someone embraced the valley's worst aspects. The Aura Baron had been one of the prisoners who led the revolt after the barrier's creation. He'd been smart enough, ruthless enough, and charismatic enough to seize control and maintain it for 10 years. That was genuinely impressive from a purely practical standpoint. Building a functioning government from a population of criminals wasn't easy. But Gomez ruled through fear rather than respect. His authority came from his willingness to kill anyone who threatened him, not from any legitimate leadership qualities. The test of faith he required of new members wasn't about assessing their loyalty or capabilities. It was about making them complicit in the old camp's crimes, binding them through guilt and shared misdeeds. The hierarchical structure he created served one purpose: maintaining Gomez's position at the top. The massacre of the fire mages revealed Gomez's true nature. He killed the mages not because they actually threatened him, but because they disagreed with him publicly. He couldn't tolerate dissent, couldn't accept that other people might have better ideas than his own. That paranoid tyranny meant the old camp was always going to collapse eventually. Structures built on fear and violence are inherently unstable. When the hero disrupted Gomez's plans and the barrier fell, the Ore Baron's entire power base evaporated because nobody actually supported him. They'd just been too afraid to rebel. Uberian presents one of the story's most tragic figures. The highest guru genuinely believed he was helping people. His visions of the sleeper weren't conscious lies or deliberate manipulations on his part. He really experienced those visions, really heard the voice promising salvation. The problem was that the voice belonged to a demon specifically trying to manipulate him, and White Berian had no frame of reference to recognize the deception. Uberian's charisma and sincerity attracted followers who desperately needed hope. The Brotherhood gave prisoners something the other camps couldn't provide: a sense that their suffering had meaning, that they weren't just dying slowly in a forgotten valley. Uberian created genuine community, genuine support structures where people helped each other and found purpose beyond mere survival. When the invocation revealed the truth, when Uberian saw the sleeper's true nature, it broke him. His last conscious act was warning Kor Angar and anyone else who would listen that the sleeper was a demon. Uberian died knowing that everything he'd built was founded on a demon's lies, that his sincere faith had led people toward damnation rather than salvation. That kind of realization would destroy anyone. The fact that Uberian used his dying words to warn others rather than falling into despair showed that underneath the manipulation and corruption, he really had been trying to help. Kor Kalam's story served as a dark mirror to Uberian's. The alchemist was brilliant, genuinely one of the most skilled potion makers and researchers in the entire kingdom. His work for the Brotherhood produced results that seemed to validate Uberian's teachings. The mind control potions worked. The sacred swampweed mixtures did enhance meditation and spiritual experiences. Kor Kalam's laboratory was filled with successful experiments that pushed the boundaries of known alchemy. But Kor Kalam's brilliance came with dangerous blind spots. He was so focused on whether he could do something that he never stopped to question whether he should. When the sleeper began directly influencing his dreams and research, Kor Kalam welcomed it as revelation rather than recognizing it as corruption. His scientific curiosity overrode his basic survival instincts. The invocation's aftermath completed Kor Kalam's transformation from researcher to fanatic. Where Uberian saw the truth and was destroyed by it, Kor Kalam saw the truth and embraced it anyway. the sleeper was a demon? Fine. Kor Kalom would serve a demon if it meant pushing his research further. The entity promised apocalyptic consequences. Kor Kalom didn't care about consequences, only about the knowledge and power he could gain. His corruption was complete and absolute, turning him into something barely human. Kor Anger represented what the Brotherhood could have been without the sleeper's influence. The Templar leader was devout, but not fanatical. He believed in Yuberian's teachings, but maintained enough critical thinking to question things that didn't make sense. When other Templars began showing signs of demonic corruption, Kor Anger noticed and tried to investigate. He was loyal to his brothers, but not blindly obedient. After Yuberian's death, Kor Anger found himself leading a religious movement that had lost its god. The Brotherhood's surviving members looked to him for guidance, but what could he tell them? That their faith had been manipulated by a demon? That their highest guru had been deceived? That everything they'd believed was fundamentally wrong? Kor Anger handled this impossible situation with quiet dignity, helping people find new purposes and gently guiding them toward healthier beliefs. His decision to support the hero's mission against the sleeper came from a place of atonement. The Brotherhood had unknowingly helped strengthen the demon. Kor Anger felt responsible for that, even though he'd been manipulated just like everyone else. Helping defeat the sleeper was a way to redeem the Brotherhood's failures and ensure Yuberian's final warning hadn't been in vain. Xardas stands apart from all the other characters because he operated on a different level entirely. The Necromancer was the only person in the valley who truly understood what was happening from the beginning. He recognized the sleeper's influence in the barrier's creation. He tracked the demon's growing power through the years. He prepared countermeasures and gathered knowledge specifically to combat this threat. But Xardas couldn't act directly. Necromancy marked him as someone touched by death magic, and the sleeper would have sensed him immediately if he tried to enter its prison. So instead, Xardas did what he did best. He manipulated events from the shadows. He ensured the hero received a letter that would take him to the valley. He provided guidance at critical moments. He prepared Uriziel and the empowerment rituals. Everything the hero accomplished was possible because Xardas laid the groundwork. Some might call this manipulative or even evil. Xardas certainly used people as tools in his larger plan. He let situations develop in ways that cost lives because intervening too early would have tipped off the sleeper. That kind of cold calculation, that willingness to accept short-term harm for long-term benefit, was characteristic of necromancers. They dealt with death so constantly that individual lives sometimes seemed less important than the bigger picture. But Xardas's goal was genuinely selfless. He wanted to stop the sleeper not for personal power or gain, but because letting a demon escape its prison would have caused catastrophic damage to the entire world. His methods were questionable, but his purpose was noble. And unlike many who claim to work for the greater good, Xardas actually succeeded. The demon was banished, the valley was freed, the world was saved. Results mattered more than intent in his worldview, and the results spoke for themselves. Finally, we should discuss the Nameless Hero himself. The deliberate choice To never name the protagonist or specify his crime was brilliant storytelling. It forced players to project themselves onto the character, to make his journey their own. But it also served a thematic purpose. In the Valley of Minds, your past didn't matter. Your crime didn't matter. Who you were before imprisonment was irrelevant. All that mattered was who you chose to become in the present. The hero could have followed Gomez's path, embracing cruelty and selfishness as survival strategies. He could have lost himself in the Brotherhood's false promises, seeking easy answers to hard questions. He could have become cynical and bitter, like many prisoners, going through the motions of existence without caring about anything. But he chose differently. He chose to help people who needed help. He chose to stand against tyranny even when it was dangerous. He chose to face a demon because someone had to, and he was capable of doing it. That choice, repeated over and over throughout his journey, transformed a nameless prisoner into a hero whose deeds would be remembered long after his name was forgotten. The Valley of Minds had broken countless people before him. It would have broken him too if he'd let it. But he didn't let it. He stayed true to himself, helped those who deserved help, and ultimately saved everyone by refusing to give up even when victory seemed impossible. The valley's creatures and dangers. The Valley of Minds wasn't just dangerous because of its prisoners and political conflicts. The wildlife and monsters that infested every corner of the territory posed constant threats to anyone who ventured beyond the camp's relative safety. Understanding these creatures helps explain why cooperation was necessary for survival and why the hero's combat skills had to improve dramatically over the course of his journey. At the lowest end of the danger spectrum were mole rats. These oversized rodents were more nuisance than true threat to capable fighters, but their diseased bites could cause infections that killed just as surely as any sword wound. Mole rats traveled in packs and attacked anything that wandered near their burrows. New prisoners who didn't know to watch for the telltale holes in the ground often suffered painful bites that left them weakened and feverish. Scavengers represented a step up in danger. These grotesque creatures looked like nothing that should exist in nature. They moved on 4 legs, but their bodies were asymmetrical, as if someone had started building an animal and gave up halfway through. Scavengers hunted in packs of 4 to 6 individuals, using coordinated tactics to overwhelm lone prey. A single scavenger was manageable for an armed fighter. 3 or 4 attacking simultaneously could bring down even experienced warriors. The origin of scavengers was never fully explained. They seemed like unnatural creatures, possibly the result of magical experiments, or perhaps animals mutated by exposure to the magical ore's radiation. Whatever their source, they had proliferated throughout the valley and represented one of the most common threats to travelers between the camps. Goblins occupied caves and ruins throughout the territory. These small humanoid creatures were smarter than scavengers but cowardly. A lone goblin would flee from any confrontation. But goblins never traveled alone. They established communities in cave systems, sometimes dozens or even hundreds living in connected chambers. Adventurers who entered goblin caves without proper preparation often found themselves surrounded, attacked from all directions, by creatures wielding crude weapons with surprising effectiveness. What made goblins particularly troublesome was their willingness to set traps. Tripwires connected to falling rocks, pits covered with thin wooden planks, even simple alarm systems using strings and bells. Goblins used all of these to protect their territories. Smart fighters learned to watch for trap signs when approaching goblin areas. Impatient or overconfident fighters ended up injured or dead before they even saw their enemies. Snappers were the valley's aquatic predators. These reptilian creatures looked somewhat like alligators, but with thicker armor plating and more aggressive dispositions. Snappers lurked in rivers, lakes, and swamps, attacking anything that came close to the water's edge. Their jaws could crush bone with ease, and their thrashing attacks could knock victims into the water where drowning became as much a danger as the snapper itself. The Brotherhood's location in the swamps put them in constant contact with snappers. The Templars learned to recognize snapper hunting grounds and avoid them when possible. But sometimes avoiding wasn't an option. Certain plants and resources only grew near water, requiring brave or desperate individuals to risk snapper attacks to gather them. Many novices earned their first scars learning to respect the snapper's hunting territories. Wolves roamed the forests and plains in organized packs. Unlike the mindless scavengers, wolves were natural predators with intelligence and pack tactics that rivaled military formations. A wolf pack would separate a target from its companions, drive it toward an ambush point, and then overwhelm it through coordinated attacks. They were also fast, capable of running down prey that tried to flee. What separated wolves from many other valley creatures was their strategic retreat capability. If a wolf pack encountered resistance too strong to overcome, they disengage and look for easier prey elsewhere. This made them less dangerous than creatures that fought to the death, but it also meant wolves survived and learned from encounters. A pack that attacked travelers on a particular path would remember what worked and what didn't, adjusting their tactics accordingly. Shadow beasts represented a major escalation in danger. These creatures were rare, thankfully, but encountering one unprepared was usually fatal. Shadow beasts were large, roughly the size of a bear, with dark fur or skin that seemed to absorb light. They moved with unnatural speed and silence, striking from ambush with claws capable of gutting an armored man with a single swipe. The origin of shadow beasts was unclear. Some believed they were natural creatures adapted to the valley's magical environment. Others thought they were deliberately created, perhaps by the ancient civilization that built the ruins scattered throughout the territory. A few whispered that shadow beasts were somehow connected to the sleeper, creatures spawned from the demon's corrupting influence. Whatever their origin, they were apex predators that even experienced hunters respected. Trolls were perhaps the most feared creatures that weren't directly magical. These massive beasts stood twice the height of a man and possessed strength that bordered on supernatural. Troll hide was thick enough to turn aside ordinary weapons. Their regenerative abilities meant wounds that would kill other creatures only slowed them temporarily, and their territorial behavior made them extraordinarily aggressive toward anything that entered their domains. Fighting a troll was considered suicidal unless you had exceptional equipment, magical support, or overwhelming numbers. Most prisoners who encountered trolls simply ran, hoping they could reach safe territory before the troll caught them. The canyon where the hero found one of the focus stones was avoided by almost everyone, specifically because a troll had claimed it as territory. Only the most desperate or capable individuals would risk that kind of encounter. Mine crawlers infested the mines throughout the valley. These arthropod creatures were roughly man-sized, with hard carapaces that protected their vital organs and multiple legs that let them navigate the tunnels with disturbing speed. Their mandibles could bite through leather armor, and their poison caused excruciating pain, along with weakness that made escape difficult. The old mine's deeper levels had been abandoned specifically because minecrawler infestation made them too dangerous to work. The creatures bred rapidly in the dark, damp environment, with queen minecrawlers producing dozens of eggs that hatched into workers and warriors. Clearing out a minecrawler nest required coordinated efforts by multiple fighters, and even successful clearings were temporary. The creatures would return within months, forcing another extermination. The Brotherhood's Templars learned to harvest minecrawler secretions for their sacred potions. This required entering the mines, locating minecrawlers, killing them carefully to avoid damaging the glands, and extracting the secretions before they degraded. It was dangerous, disgusting work that most prisoners wouldn't consider for any amount of payment. That the Templars did it willingly showed both their dedication to the Brotherhood and their combat capabilities. Orcs were the valley's other intelligent inhabitants. Unlike the prisoners, the orcs had been in the valley before the barrier's creation. They were supposedly slaves, brought in to work the mines alongside human convicts. But when the revolt happened and prisoners seized control, the orcs saw an opportunity. They established their own territories in the southern regions and built a society separate from the three human camps. The orcs of the Valley of Mines were warriors by culture and training. Every orc, male or female, learned combat from childhood. Their physical advantages, greater size, strength, and endurance compared to humans, made them formidable opponents even without training. With training, an orc warrior could defeat multiple human fighters. The orcs also had their own shamans, spellcasters who used a different magical tradition than human mages. What made the orcs particularly interesting was their connection to the sleeper. Their ancestors, centuries ago, had summoned the demon and then sealed it away after realizing their mistake. That history continued to influence orcish culture. Their shamans performed rituals meant to maintain the ancient seal. Their warriors guarded the approaches to the demon's prison. When the sleeper began corrupting prisoners through visions and dreams, the orcs recognized what was happening because they'd seen it before. But the sleeper's influence affected orcs too. Some shamans fell under the demon's control, secretly working to weaken the seal rather than maintain it. Orc warriors who had guarded the prison for generations found themselves compelled to serve the very entity they were supposed to contain. The conflict among the orcs, between those still loyal to their ancestral duty and those corrupted by the sleeper, was never fully shown in the main story, but evidence of it was everywhere for observant travelers. The undead in Xardas' tower and the temple represented a different category of threat entirely. These weren't natural creatures or even living beings. They were corpses, animated through necromancy, given a semblance of life through magical energy. Xardas's undead servants were relatively simple constructs, skeletons and zombies programmed with basic instructions and little independent thought. The undead orcs in the Temple of the Sleeper were far more sophisticated. They retained fragments of memory and skill from their lives. They could fight with tactics and strategy rather than mindless aggression. And they served the Sleeper not through magical compulsion, but through residual loyalty, their spirits so warped by centuries of demonic influence that they continued serving even in death. Fighting undead required different tactics than fighting living creatures. Undead didn't feel pain or fear. They didn't tire or need to breathe. Wounds that would incapacitate living opponents barely slowed them. The only reliable way to stop undead was complete destruction, dismemberment, decapitation, or magical banishment. This made them particularly dangerous for fighters trained against living opponents who suddenly found their usual tactics ineffective. The deeper meanings. Gothic's story operates on multiple levels beyond its surface narrative of prisoners fighting for survival. The game explored themes that resonated with players long after they completed it. Ideas about freedom, power, faith, and the nature of heroism itself. The barrier serves as the central metaphor for the entire story. On its surface, it's a magical prison keeping convicts contained. But it represents something deeper. The invisible constraints that trap people in circumstances beyond their control. The prisoners didn't choose to be thrown into the valley. They didn't choose to have the barrier expand and trap the mages who created it. They certainly didn't choose to have their prison become infected with demonic corruption. Yet despite being trapped by circumstances they couldn't control, the prisoners still had choices. They chose what kind of society to build within their constraints. They chose whether to embrace cruelty or maintain their humanity. They chose whether to give in to despair or keep fighting for something better. The barrier contained their bodies, but their choices remained free. This theme resonated with players because most people feel constrained by circumstances at some point in their lives. Economic limitations, family obligations, health problems, societal expectations. These barriers are just as real as the magical dome over the Valley of Minds, even if they're less visible. Gothic suggested that even when trapped by circumstances beyond your control, you still have power over how you respond. You can choose dignity over degradation. You can choose hope over despair. And sometimes, if you're brave enough and lucky enough, you can find a way to break the barrier entirely. The three camps represented different responses to imprisonment. The old camp offered security through submission. Gomez promised that if you accepted his authority and worked within his system, you'd be protected and relatively comfortable. This was the authoritarian bargain: give up freedom and receive safety in return. The appeal was obvious. In a dangerous world, knowing you have walls and guards protecting you provides real psychological comfort. But the old camp's security came at a terrible price. The hierarchy dehumanized everyone below the top tier. Diggers were treated as disposable labor. shadows had to constantly prove their worth or risk demotion. Even guards lived in fear of Gomez's paranoia. The security Gomez provided was conditional and could be revoked at any moment based on his whims. It was a gilded cage that trapped people just as surely as the barrier trapped the valley. The new camp represented the revolutionary alternative. Lee rejected Gomez's authority entirely and built a society based on different principles. Merit mattered more than hierarchy. Every member had a voice in decision-making, and the entire camp worked toward a single goal: destroying the barrier and achieving actual freedom rather than comfortable imprisonment. But revolution came with its own costs. The new camp was poorer than the old camp because they didn't have trade access. They were more dangerous to live in because they couldn't offer the same security. And their plan to destroy the barrier through an ore explosion might have killed everyone in the valley. The new camp's freedom was real, but it was also precarious and risky in ways that the old camp's security wasn't. The Sect camp offered a third path: transcendence through faith. The Brotherhood acknowledged that physical escape might be impossible, so they sought spiritual escape instead. They promised that devotion to the sleeper would bring salvation, that faith could set them free even if the barrier remained. This was the religious response to suffering, finding meaning in hardship rather than trying to overcome it through force. The Sect camp's appeal came from its ability to reframe the entire situation. You weren't trapped in a prison. You were being tested by your God. Your suffering had purpose. Your devotion mattered. And eventually, if you remained faithful, you'd be rewarded with something better than mere physical freedom. This narrative gave people hope and community, both of which are essential for psychological survival in terrible circumstances. But as the story revealed, the Brotherhood's faith was built on lies. The sleeper wasn't a god offering salvation. It was a demon seeking servants. The visions weren't divine messages. They were psychological manipulation. And the promised transcendence would have led to damnation rather than freedom. The Brotherhood showed how faith, without critical thinking, can become a tool for those who wish to exploit believers. These three camps, three different philosophies, all coexisted in the same small valley. Prisoners could choose which approach resonated with their own values. Some valued security over freedom and joined the old camp. Some valued freedom over security and joined the new camp. Some valued meaning over material concerns and joined the Brotherhood. And some, like the hero, moved between all three, taking what was useful from each while maintaining independence. This freedom to choose one's response to imprisonment reflected one of Gothic's core messages. Circumstances may constrain your options, but they can't eliminate choice entirely. Even in the worst situations, you still have agency over how you respond. The theme of power and its corruption runs throughout the entire story. Gomez started as a prisoner, just like everyone else. He led the revolt against the guards, which was arguably a heroic act. He helped establish order in the chaos after the barrier's expansion. These were positive contributions that genuinely helped people survive. But power corrupted him. Once he tasted authority, he couldn't let it go. He transformed from liberator to tyrant, from someone fighting against oppression to someone embodying it. The Fire Mage's massacre demonstrated how completely Gomez had been corrupted. He killed people who had been his allies, people who posed no physical threat to him, simply because they disagreed with his plans. That willingness to murder anyone who questioned his authority showed that Gomez had become exactly the kind of tyrant he once rebelled against. Power had transformed him into the very thing he fought to escape. But the story also showed that power itself wasn't necessarily corrupting. Lee had power in the new camp, but used it to build rather than oppress. Core Angar had authority in the Brotherhood, but wielded it with humility and compassion. Xardas possessed perhaps the most raw power of anyone in the valley through his necromantic mastery, yet he used it for a genuinely selfless purpose. The difference wasn't in the power itself, but in how individuals chose to use it. This suggested that corruption comes from character flaws that power reveals rather than creates. Gomez was likely always paranoid and controlling. Power just gave him the means to express those tendencies without restraint. Lee was always principled and strategic. Power gave him the means to build something reflecting those principles. Power amplifies who you already are, rather than fundamentally changing you. The Sleeper represented ultimate corruption, a being whose entire existence was devoted to manipulating and destroying others. The demon couldn't offer genuine salvation because it was incapable of caring about anyone's well-being except its own. Every promise it made was a lie designed to serve its goal of escaping imprisonment. Uberion, Kor Kalom, Baal, Lucor, all of them were tools the demon used and discarded without a moment's concern for their suffering. Yet the Sleeper's power came entirely from its victim's willingness to believe its promises. The demon couldn't force anyone to serve it. It had to convince people to choose service through manipulation and lies. This made it a metaphor for all the corrupt institutions and individuals who maintain power by convincing people to act against their own interests. The Sleeper's defeat came when enough people recognized the lies for what they were and chose to fight back despite the risks. The theme of faith versus reason plays out through the Brotherhood's story arc. Uberion's faith was sincere, but based on incomplete information. He experienced genuine visions and interpreted them through the lens of religious belief. When someone has powerful spiritual experiences, it's natural to seek meaning in them, to believe they come from something divine rather than something dangerous. Uberion's mistake wasn't in having faith, but in refusing to question whether his faith was properly placed. Core Angar represented faith tempered by reason. He believed in Uberion's teachings, but maintained enough critical thinking to notice when things didn't add up. When the invocation went wrong, Core Angar didn't double down on faith. He listened to Uberion's dying words and accepted that they'd been deceived. This willingness to update beliefs based on new evidence saved him from Kor Kalom's fate. Kor Kalom showed what happens when reason detaches from ethics. His scientific curiosity was admirable in many ways. His research produced genuine results. But his willingness to serve a demon just to continue his research showed that intelligence without wisdom is dangerous. Knowing how to do something doesn't mean you should do it. Understanding a demon's nature doesn't mean you should help it escape. Kor Kalom's brilliance made him more dangerous, not less, because he could rationalize any action as necessary for his research. Xardas represented reason fully embracing its responsibilities. The necromancer understood more about the sleeper than anyone, but that knowledge led him to oppose it rather than serve it. He recognized that some things shouldn't be released regardless of what knowledge might be gained. His willingness to manipulate events and use people as tools was morally questionable, but it came from a place of understanding long-term consequences. Xardas asked himself not just, "What can I do?" but "What will happen if I do this?" and acted based on those projections. The game suggested that neither pure faith nor pure reason was sufficient alone. Faith without reason led to manipulation and exploitation. Reason without ethical grounding led to moral catastrophe. What was needed was a balance. Faith that gives meaning and motivation. Reason that questions and analyzes, and wisdom that recognizes which is appropriate in any given situation. The hero's journey from nameless prisoner to demon slayer followed the classic heroic structure, but with important variations. Traditional hero stories often feature chosen ones, people marked by destiny or divine favor to accomplish great things. Gothic rejected that entirely. The hero wasn't chosen by prophecy or divine intervention. He was just a prisoner who happened to carry a letter, happened to make the right choices, and happened to survive long enough to become capable of facing the sleeper. This made his heroism more meaningful in some ways. He wasn't special because of destiny. He became special through his choices and actions. Every decision to help someone, every risk taken for a cause larger than himself, every moment of standing against cruelty despite personal danger, these choices accumulated into heroism. The valley was full of people who could have made similar choices but didn't. The hero was remarkable, not because of what he was, but because of what he chose to do. Xardas's manipulation complicated this narrative. The necromancer arranged circumstances to push the hero toward confronting the sleeper. Was the hero truly making free choices if someone was manipulating events to guide him toward specific outcomes? This philosophical question never received a definitive answer in the game, which was probably intentional. Real life rarely offers clear distinctions between free will and external influence. We're all shaped by circumstances we didn't create, by people who influence us in ways we don't fully recognize. What mattered was that when the hero learned about Xardas's manipulation, he could have refused. He could have walked away, left the valley once the barrier fell, and let someone else deal with the sleeper. But he chose to continue because he recognized that stopping the demon was the right thing to do regardless of how he'd gotten to that point. That choice, made with full awareness of the manipulation, validated all his previous choices. He was a hero not because Xardas made him one, but because he chose to be one, even after learning about the manipulation. The nature of imprisonment itself served as a constant theme throughout. Physical imprisonment in the valley was obvious, but the game showed other forms of captivity. The fire mages were imprisoned by their loyalty to the crown and their scholarly traditions. Gomez was imprisoned by his paranoia and need for control. The Brotherhood was imprisoned by faith that turned out to be misplaced. Lee was imprisoned by his past, by the betrayal that sent him to the valley and the bitterness that followed. Freedom, the game suggested, wasn't just about escaping physical constraints. It was about escaping the mental and emotional prisons people built for themselves. Diego was freer than many outside the barrier because he maintained his humanity and made peace with his circumstances. Gomez was imprisoned even as he ruled the old camp because his paranoia meant he could never truly rest or trust anyone. The barrier's destruction gave everyone the possibility of physical freedom, but psychological and emotional freedom required different kinds of work. The ending, with the hero buried in the temple's ruins but alive, suggested that freedom often comes at tremendous cost. He saved the valley and banished the demon, but he lost companions, nearly died multiple times, and watched the society he'd become part of tear itself apart. Heroism wasn't clean or easy. It was brutal, painful, and left scars that would never fully heal. But it was also necessary. Someone had to face the sleeper. Someone had to risk everything to protect others, and the hero chose to be that someone. The legacy of the valley. Gothic's influence extended far beyond the boundaries of its immediate story. The game was released in 2001 by a relatively small German development studio, Piranha Bytes, and it competed in a market dominated by bigger names and larger budgets. Yet it carved out a dedicated fan base that remains passionate decades later. Understanding why requires looking at what made Gothic special beyond just its plot. The world building was remarkably cohesive and grounded for a fantasy setting. The Valley of Mines felt like a real place with consistent internal logic. The three camps weren't just quest hubs. They were societies with their own cultures, economies, and political structures. Every named character had a role in their community. Every location served a purpose. Nothing felt like it existed solely for gameplay convenience. This attention to detail extended to how the game handled player progression. You couldn't just wander into dangerous areas at the beginning and expect to survive. The valley's geography naturally guided players from safer areas near the camps into increasingly dangerous territories as they became more capable. But this wasn't achieved through artificial level barriers or invisible walls. It was accomplished through realistic threat assessment. You saw a troll and recognized you couldn't fight it yet. You encountered orcs and understood you needed better equipment and more training. The faction system created genuine moral complexity. None of the camps were purely good or evil. The old camp offered stability at the cost of freedom. The new camp offered freedom at the cost of stability. The Brotherhood offered meaning at the cost of truth. Players had to decide which trade-offs they were willing to accept. And that decision felt meaningful because each camp had legitimate appeal alongside its problems. The game's approach to dialogue and character interaction was revolutionary for its time. Most RPGs used dialogue trees where you selected from multiple options, each leading to predetermined responses. Gothic simplified this by having most conversations flow naturally, with only occasional meaningful choices that actually affected outcomes. This made interactions feel more like conversations and less like navigating menu systems. Characters remembered your actions and reacted accordingly. If you helped someone, they'd be friendly later. If you stole from a merchant, they'd refuse to trade with you. If you joined one camp, members of opposing camps would treat you with suspicion. This created a sense that your choices mattered, that the world responded to your decisions, rather than just railroading you through a predetermined story. The magic system integrated seamlessly with the world rather than feeling like a game mechanic grafted on. Mages weren't just characters who could cast spells. They were scholars who studied ancient texts, performed rituals, and understood magical theory. Learning magic required joining a faction with mages who could teach you, then studying and practicing to master each spell. This made magical progression feel earned rather than automatic. Combat was deliberately challenging and weighty. Fights weren't about clicking rapidly and watching animations. They required timing, positioning, and understanding enemy behavior. A single wolf could kill careless players. A group of goblins could overwhelm overconfident warriors. This made survival feel genuinely rewarding and gave combat real stakes. Every fight mattered because every fight could potentially kill you. The game's atmosphere was enhanced by an excellent soundtrack that emphasized ambient sounds and environmental audio. Walking through the forest, you'd hear wind in the trees, animal calls in the distance, the crunch of your footsteps on different surfaces. The camps had their own soundscapes, the old camps' bustling merchants and clanging forges, the new camps' crackling fires and quiet conversations, the Brotherhood's distant chanting and swamp ambience. This audio design made the world feel alive and immersive. Gothic's technical achievement was particularly impressive given Piranha Bytes' limited resources. The entire valley was a seamless world with no loading screens between areas. You could see distant landmarks and actually travel to them without transitions. The day-night cycle affected NPC behavior realistically. Characters had schedules, slept at night, worked during the day. Guards patrolled on actual routes. This created a sense that the world existed independently of the player, rather than just responding to player presence. The game's difficulty and lack of hand-holding created a specific kind of experience that resonated with players tired of being coddled. Gothic didn't mark quest objectives on your map. It told you where to go through dialogue and expected you to navigate there yourself. It didn't scale enemies to your level. If you wandered into a high-level area, you died and learned to be more careful. This respected players' intelligence and created genuine exploration and discovery. But Gothic was also notoriously janky and rough around the edges. The controls took time to master. The interface was clunky. Bugs were common. The English translation was often awkward. These technical problems limited the game's mass-market appeal. but didn't diminish its impact on those who pushed through the initial learning curve. Players who invested time in learning Gothic systems discovered a remarkably deep and rewarding experience. The game spawned 2 direct sequels and a series that continued the story and expanded the world. Gothic 2 picked up immediately after the first game's ending, following the Nameless Hero as he recovered from the temple's collapse and faced new threats emerging in the aftermath of the Sleeper's banishment. Gothic 3 expanded the scope dramatically, moving beyond the Valley of Mines to explore the wider conflict between Murtana and the Orcs across an entire continent. Each sequel built on the original's foundation while expanding and refining systems. Gothic 2 added more complexity to character progression and expanded the world significantly. Gothic 3 attempted an even more ambitious open world, but struggled with technical issues that prevented it from fully realizing its vision. Later games in the series moved away from the original's dark prison setting, but they maintained many of the design philosophies that made Gothic special. The Gothic series influenced numerous other games, particularly European RPGs. The Risen series, also developed by Piranha Bytes after they lost the Gothic license, was essentially a spiritual successor that maintained many of the same design principles. The detailed faction systems, challenging combat, and emphasis on world building over mechanical complexity all drew from Gothic's template. Even today, decades after release, Gothic maintains a devoted fan base. Players continue discussing its story, analyzing its themes, and creating mods that expand or refine the experience. The game's reputation has only grown over time as more people discover it and recognize what made it special. In an era where many RPGs have moved toward more accessible, streamlined experiences, Gothic represents a different philosophy, one that trusted players to handle complexity, difficulty, and a world that didn't revolve around them. The story of the Valley of Mines, of prisoners struggling against their circumstances and ultimately facing down an ancient evil, resonated because it touched on universal human experiences. We've all felt trapped by circumstances beyond our control. We've all had to choose between security and freedom, between faith and reason, between self-interest and helping others. We've all wondered whether we have the strength to face challenges that seem insurmountable. Gothic answered those questions through its Nameless Hero's journey. You don't need to be chosen by destiny to make a difference. You don't need special powers or divine favor. What you need is the willingness to help when help is needed, to stand up when everyone else sits down, to face danger when the alternative is letting evil triumph. Heroism isn't about being special. It's about choosing to do what's right, even when it's hard. That message, delivered through a grimy fantasy prison and a battle against a demon most people never knew existed, proved surprisingly powerful. The Nameless Hero saved the world, and almost nobody beyond the Valley of Mines even knew it happened. There were no parades or monuments. King Robar probably took credit for the barrier's destruction through some official narrative, but the hero knew what he'd accomplished, and his companions knew, and that was enough. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones nobody else sees. Sometimes heroism means doing the right thing without recognition or reward. And sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from escaping physical constraints, but from making peace with them while refusing to let them break your spirit. The magical systems and ancient mysteries. Before we conclude, we should examine the magical frameworks that underpinned everything in the Valley of Minds. Understanding these systems helps explain how the barrier was created, why the sleeper posed such a terrible threat, and how the hero's victory was even possible. Murtanen magic was divided into several distinct schools, each with its own philosophy and methodology. The fire mages represented the orthodox magical tradition, studying spells through ancient texts and structured learning. Their magic focused on elemental manipulation, particularly fire, but also included lightning, protective wards, and various utility spells. Fire magic was aggressive and direct, reflecting the school's traditional role supporting military operations and enforcing order. The Circle of Fire maintained strict hierarchies and traditions. Apprentices studied under masters for years before being allowed to cast even basic spells unsupervised. Advancement through the ranks required both magical proficiency and adherence to the Order's rules and customs. This conservative approach created powerful, knowledgeable mages, but also made the Circle resistant to innovation or questioning established doctrine. Choristo exemplified the fire mage ideal: powerful, disciplined, loyal to the crown, and dedicated to preserving magical knowledge. His decision to oppose Gomez's war plans came from genuine principle, rather than self-interest. The fire mages understood that their role transcended politics. They served the kingdom's long-term interests, even when that meant contradicting the immediate demands of those in power. Gomez's massacre of the fire mages was particularly tragic because he destroyed the valley's most principled and capable magical practitioners. Water magic represented a different approach entirely. The water mages studied magic through experimentation and analysis rather than tradition and rote learning. Where fire mages learned spells from ancient grimoires, water mages developed new spells through systematic research. Their focus was on transformation, healing, and understanding magic's fundamental principles rather than simply wielding power. Xardas embodied the water mage philosophy. His plan to destroy the barrier through an ore explosion wasn't traditional magic. It was applied magical theory using focus stones and accumulated magical energy in ways the original creators never intended. This experimental approach made the water mages less immediately powerful than their fire counterparts, but more adaptable and innovative when facing novel problems. The philosophical divide between fire and water mages reflected deeper questions about knowledge and power. Fire mages believed in preserving and protecting traditional wisdom, ensuring that dangerous knowledge didn't fall into irresponsible hands. Water mages believed in pushing boundaries and discovering new possibilities, accepting risk as the price of progress. Both approaches had merits and flaws, and the story suggested that cooperation between them was stronger than either alone. Necromancy stood apart from both orthodox traditions as forbidden knowledge. The mainstream magical community considered raising and controlling the dead to be inherently evil, a violation of natural order that corrupted anyone who practiced it. This stigma made necromancers pariahs even among other mages. Xardas's exile from the magical community preceded his imprisonment in the valley, though the specific circumstances were never fully detailed. Yet the story presented necromancy more ambiguously than traditional fantasy narratives. Xardas was morally complex, rather than straightforwardly evil. His methods were questionable, but his goals were noble. His undead servants were tools rather than violations of human dignity, since they'd been created from corpses rather than enslaved spirits. The game suggested that necromancy's evil reputation came partly from legitimate concerns, but also partly from the living's discomfort with death and those who studied it. Xardas's knowledge proved essential for defeating the Sleeper precisely because he understood death magic intimately. The demon's prison, the undead orc shamans, the nature of demonic entities themselves. All of these were connected to death and corruption in ways orthodox mages couldn't fully comprehend. Sometimes defeating darkness requires understanding darkness, even if that understanding carries moral costs. The Brotherhood's mind magic represented an entirely new tradition, developed within the valley itself. Uberian and his followers learned spells that could influence thoughts, manipulate emotions, and control weaker minds. This wasn't traditional Murtanan magic. The techniques came from the Sleeper itself, taught through visions and dreams to servants who would use them to spread the demon's influence. What made Brotherhood magic particularly insidious was that it felt benevolent to its practitioners. The ability to calm angry people, to help others find inner peace, to guide confused individuals toward clarity. These seemed like positive applications of power, but underneath the helpful exterior was manipulation and control. The line between guiding someone toward peace and robbing them of free will was thinner than Brotherhood members wanted to admit. Cor Callum's sacred potions combined alchemy with this mind magic to create substances that opened users to psychic influence. Swampweed, grown in the valley, minecrawler secretions, and other ingredients were processed using rituals that infused them with the Sleeper's corrupting energy. Consuming these potions made people more susceptible to visions and psychic communication, which the Brotherhood interpreted as spiritual enlightenment, but was actually just making them vulnerable to demonic manipulation. The focus stones represented ancient technology or magic far beyond current Murtanan understanding. These crystalline artifacts could store massive amounts of magical energy and direct it according to specific patterns. The 12 mages who created the barrier used focus stones because attempting such a powerful spell without them would have been impossible or instantly fatal. The stone's origins were never fully explained, but evidence suggested they came from a civilization that predated both modern Murtana and the ancient orcs. The ruins scattered throughout the valley, with their distinctive architecture and surviving magical protections, indicated an advanced culture that mastered magic in ways current practitioners could barely imagine. The focus stones were artifacts of that lost age, discovered and repurposed, but never truly understood. Using focus stones without understanding their full capabilities led directly to the barrier's catastrophic expansion. The 12 mages knew how to channel energy through the stones, but didn't understand the feedback systems or safety mechanisms built into them. When the spell interacted with the sleeper's ambient energy, the stones responded in ways the casters couldn't predict or control. The result was a magical disaster that trapped everyone and set the stage for the demon's eventual attempt at escape. The ancient orcs who sealed the sleeper had their own magical tradition, distinct from human practice. Orcish shamanism focused on spiritual power rather than studied formulae. Shamans communed with ancestral spirits, drew power from totems and sacred sites, and performed rituals that bound supernatural entities. This tradition made them capable of something human mages couldn't accomplish, creating a seal strong enough to contain a demon indefinitely. The 5 orc shamans who originally imprisoned the sleeper sacrificed themselves in the process. They bound their own spirits into undead forms, linking their continued existence to the maintenance of the seal. As long as they remained intact, the seal held. This was necromancy of a sort, but motivated by self-sacrifice rather than desire for power. The shamans chose to become undead guardians, accepting an eternity of existence without life to protect future generations from the demon they'd mistakenly released. The hero's battle against these undead shamans represented not just physical combat, but also respect for their sacrifice. They were enemies because they stood between him and the sleeper, but they were also tragic heroes who had given everything to fix their mistake. Destroying them to reach the demon meant ending their long vigil, releasing them from centuries of duty. It was mercy as much as victory. Uriziel itself embodied a magical tradition even older than the orcs. The sword was forged specifically to combat demons, which meant its creators understood demonic entities well enough to develop weapons against them. This suggested multiple previous demonic incursions had occurred throughout history, each teaching subsequent civilizations more about how to defend against such threats. Uriziel was accumulated knowledge given physical form. Generations of demon-fighting wisdom crystallized into a single artifact. The empowerment rituals that charged Uriziel with enough power to banish the sleeper used the same focus stones that created the barrier, but in reverse. Instead of drawing on the sleeper's ambient energy to power a spell, the rituals drew pure magical energy from the valley itself and concentrated it into the sword. This turned Uriziel into essentially a weapon made of crystallized magic, capable of striking at entities that existed partially outside physical reality. The Temple of the Sleeper's architecture incorporated magical principles that maintained the demon's prison. The chamber walls weren't just stone. They were constructed using geometric patterns that created natural binding effects, trapping supernatural entities through spatial manipulation rather than energy barriers. The ancient builders had understood that demons existed partially in dimensions beyond normal space and had designed the prison to constrain the sleeper across multiple dimensional levels simultaneously. When the hero destroyed the sleeper and escaped the collapsing temple, he was actually witnessing the prison's dimensional structure unraveling. The physical collapse of stone and earth was accompanied by the breakdown of spatial distortions, that had kept the demon contained. The entire temple system was linked, so destroying the core caused cascade failures throughout the structure. This was why the old mine collapsed as well. Its deepest levels were part of the same ancient construction, connected through magical architecture that spanned the entire valley. The barrier's final destruction, when the sleeper was banished, confirmed what Xardas had suspected. The barrier's power came from the demon's imprisoned energy. The 12 mages thought they were using pure magical force channeled through the focus stones. They didn't realize that they were actually tapping into a demonic power source. When that source was severed by the sleeper's banishment, the barrier lost its foundation and shattered. This revealed a troubling implication. King Robar's entire prison operation had been built on demonic energy from the start. Every piece of ore extracted from the valley over 10 years, every weapon forged to fight the orcs, every shield that protected Mertenan's soldiers, all of it was indirectly powered by the sleeper. The war effort that the valley was supposed to support had been corrupted at its foundation. What this meant for the ongoing war remained unclear at the story's end. Would weapons forged from the valley's ore remain effective now that their magical source was gone? Would the accumulated artifacts retain their enchantments or fade over time? These questions weren't answered, left as implications for the player to consider rather than explicit plot points. The magical systems, ancient mysteries, and various traditions all wove together into a coherent framework that explained how everything fit together. Magic in Gothic wasn't just a gameplay mechanic. It was a force with history, consequences, and internal consistency. Understanding these systems enhanced appreciation for the story by showing how each piece connected to the larger whole. Closing reflections. We've journeyed through the complete story of Gothic, from a nameless prisoner's arrival in the valley, through the climactic battle against an ancient demon and the ultimate destruction of the barrier that had defined 10 years of imprisonment. This wasn't just a story about escaping prison. It was about maintaining humanity in inhumane circumstances, about choosing to help others even when focused on mere survival would be easier, and about facing terrible truths when comfortable lies would be more pleasant. The Valley of Mines was a microcosm of larger society, with all its conflicts between authority and freedom, faith and reason, self-interest and community responsibility. The three camps represented three different visions for how society should function, each with legitimate appeal and serious flaws. The fact that none emerged as clearly superior suggested that maybe perfect social systems don't exist, only different trade-offs that different people value differently. The characters we met were shaped by their circumstances, but not defined by them. Diego could have become another brutalized thug, but chose kindness instead. Lee could have let betrayal destroy his principles, but maintained them despite having every reason to abandon them. Milton could have retreated into despair after his mentor's deaths, but chose to honor them through continued service. Lester could have clung to broken faith, but chose to rebuild his understanding of reality around truth rather than comforting lies. And why Berion, perhaps the most tragic figure, genuinely tried to help people despite being manipulated by forces he couldn't understand. His faith was sincere, even though it was misplaced. His death, with his final words warning others about the truth, showed that even when someone is wrong about the most important things, their character can still shine through in how they handle discovering their mistakes. The sleeper represented evil in its purest form: manipulation, exploitation, and complete disregard for any suffering except its own. The demon couldn't force anyone to serve it directly. It had to convince people to choose service through lies and false promises. This made it a perfect metaphor for how real evil operates in the world. Rarely do people consciously choose to do terrible things. Usually, they're convinced that what they're doing is necessary, beneficial, or justified. The sleeper's defeat came when enough people recognized the manipulation and chose truth over comfortable lies. The Nameless Hero's journey from prisoner to demon slayer followed a path defined by choices rather than destiny. He wasn't special because of prophecy or divine selection. He became special through accumulated decisions to help rather than harm, to face danger rather than flee, to maintain principles even when circumstances made expedience tempting. His heroism was democratic in the truest sense, available to anyone willing to make similar choices. Xardas's manipulation added moral complexity to what could have been a straightforward hero story. Was the hero truly free if a necromancer was arranging circumstances to guide him towards specific outcomes? The game never answered this definitively, leaving players to draw their own conclusions. But perhaps the answer doesn't matter as much as we think. We're all influenced by circumstances and people we don't fully understand. What matters is what we choose to do once we become aware of those influences. The ending, with the barrier destroyed and the valley opening to the outside world, was simultaneously triumphant and melancholy. Freedom was achieved, but at tremendous cost. People had died. Communities had been destroyed. The hero himself was buried in collapsing ruins, his fate uncertain. Victory wasn't clean or easy. It was brutal, messy, and came with scars that would never fully heal. But it was still victory. The demon was banished. The valley was free. And people who had been prisoners for 10 years could finally go home. Gothic told this story with remarkable groundedness for a fantasy setting. The magic felt like a natural part of the world, rather than arbitrary game mechanics. The monsters were dangerous creatures to be avoided or prepared for rather than experience point dispensers. The factions were complex societies with internal politics rather than simple quest hubs. Every element reinforced the sense that this was a real place with consistent internal logic, where actions had consequences. The game's technical roughness and difficulty created a specific kind of experience that resonated with players who wanted to be challenged rather than coddled. It respected players' intelligence and problem-solving abilities. It trusted them to navigate complex social situations without explicit moral indicators telling them who was good or evil. It let them make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, rather than automatically succeeding at everything they attempted. This philosophy of design influenced numerous games that followed, particularly in European RPG development. The emphasis on coherent world building, meaningful choices, and challenging gameplay became hallmarks of games that drew inspiration from Gothic's template. Even today, decades after release, Gothic's influence can be seen in RPGs that prioritize immersion and internal consistency over accessibility and mass-market appeal. The story of Gothic ultimately asks fundamental questions about freedom, power, faith, and heroism. It suggests that freedom is meaningless without the responsibility to use it wisely. Power corrupts only those who are already corruptible. Faith without reason becomes manipulation. And heroism isn't about being special. It's about choosing to do what's right, even when it's difficult, dangerous, and nobody will ever thank you for it. The Nameless Hero saved the world from a demon most people never knew existed. He did it without recognition or reward beyond the satisfaction of knowing he'd done what needed doing. And perhaps that's the ultimate message. Sometimes, the most important victories are the ones nobody else sees, achieved by people nobody considers special, who simply refused to let evil triumph while they had breath to oppose it. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Valley of Minds, through the story of prisoners, demons, and one nameless hero who changed everything. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Gothic's complete narrative, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to Fabled Dreams for more explorations of video game lore and storytelling. The stories in our favorite games deserve to be examined, discussed, and celebrated, and your support helps make that possible. Until next time, may your own journeys be filled with meaningful choices, true companions, and the courage to face whatever demons await. Sleep well, dreamers.